The storm wrenches the fishing vessel in half. The yawning sound of metal buckling and ripping can barely be heard over the explosive waves. Crew members pour out of the fragmented ship, washed away with the water, like ants fleeing a flooding nest. The deck lurches and tips upwards into the air. A wave crashes against it, almost knocking the sailor off the railing, but he clings on for dear life. Soaked through, shivering violently, and feeling the dreaded exhaustion creeping into his limbs, he looks around helplessly as his crewmates drown around him. Only one man remains on the deck with him, but the captain's usual steely confidence has gone. Behind the man's bushy beard and grizzled skin, the sailor sees a little boy scared out of his mind. The captain grabs the sailor by the scruff of the neck and hauls him close enough for them to shout over the sound of the seas around them. "I saw her!" The captain's rambling and ranting, repeating himself and gesticulating wildly at the seas around them. "The Naiad! I saw her in the water this morning! Our voyage was cursed from the start. We should never have left port. She's in the water now, she—" A colossal wave throws what is left of the boat through the air. The railing slips through the sailor's fingers as he flies high between the waves. For a moment, the world stands still. It's like he's a gull hovering in place, surveying the carnage beneath him, and there in the water, what looks like. But the world isn't standing still. He hurtles back towards the ocean and slams into it, hard enough to knock the air clean out of his lungs. Icy water tugs at him, pulling him downwards, deeper and deeper, colder and colder. Like arms wrapping around him, dragging him. The sailor wakes with a start. Water laps at his face. What were once hulking waves are now little more than ripples. He spits out a mouthful of sand and shakes his head. His body's trembling violently from the cold, but the warm glow of the sun on his back is already doing its best to help him. How on earth had he survived that? There are groans all around him. Dotted along the beach are his fellow fishermen. He hasn't got the energy to count them, but it doesn't look like all of them. Just ahead of him, further up the beach, sits the captain. Rocking back and forth, trembling, the captain noiselessly points a finger out to sea. Using what little energy he has left, the sailor rolls onto his back to see the silhouette of a woman standing there on the water. No, not a silhouette. The morning sunlight is shining straight through her, as if she's made of nothing but water. She steps delicately across the surface of the water, walking towards the coughing fishermen who have all seen her by now. There's a delicacy to how she walks, tiptoeing gently on the rippling water, as if scared of disturbing it even slightly. The light dances and glitters on her skin like it does across the ocean. No, not skin. She really is made of water. Every inch of her is composed entirely of what looks like the purest, cleanest water the sailor has ever seen. Was it her? The arms that he felt dragging him through the water? Did she save him? Did she save all of them? The water nymph waits with the men until the ambulances arrive. She walks across the sand, going between them. Every few minutes, she dips her toes back in the sea and takes what looks like a deep breath, even though she has no lungs to fill. Then she's back amongst them, offering noiseless comfort. There's an old abandoned house just up from the beach, what looks like the mansion of a former millionaire. In apparent fascination, the nymph keeps going over to examine the ornate fountain in the courtyard. Even in a state of disrepair, the fountain is stunning. She lowers herself gently into the water and disappears under the surface, just as the first ambulance rounds the corner. As the paramedics wrap the foil blanket around the sailor and walk him to the vehicle, he catches the nymph poking her head out of the surface of the fountain's water. He's not the only one to see. Tucked just out of sight near the tree line is a nondescript black sedan with a group of men sitting inside. One of them takes a photograph of the water woman in the fountain, while another talks urgently over the phone. The sailor has barely been in the back of the ambulance for 2 minutes before one of the men from the car approaches him. The man holds an expensive-looking watch in his hand. "Excuse me, sir, does this belong to you?" The sailor sits up suspiciously. He's about to open his mouth to refute the man when the needle penetrates his thigh and the amnestic fills his bloodstream. By the time the sailor arrives at the hospital, all his memories of the previous 24 hours have slipped away into the abyss. The containment team is at work in less than 6 hours, while a group of agents, dressed in scrubs, follow the ambulances to the hospital to ensure all accounts of the ship's crash have been entirely erased. Another team sets to work, cordoning off the beach. A tourist family, excited about their day at the beach, argue with the disguised agents cordoning off the road. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's nothing we can do. A shark sighting is a shark sighting. We just can't risk it today." Meanwhile, a steady stream of construction vehicles rumbles past, followed by a large Home Depot truck. They all pull up outside the mansion, where a team of agents has the fountain surrounded. Tasers and cattle prods at the ready, they grip their weapons at even the slightest ripple of water. Excavators get to work quickly, drilling at the ground around the fountain and cracking through the paving stones. And before anyone nearby has any clue of what's happening, the fountain has been removed, loaded into the back of the watertight fake Home Depot truck, and has disappeared over the horizon. The water nymph refuses to poke her head out of the water the whole way. The world around her is dark and dry. It shakes and rumbles for hours. The beautiful fountain she'd climbed into just a few hours earlier now feels tiny. There's barely enough water in here for her to swim in a circle. She'd always observed these strange-looking vehicles from a distance, lifting her eyes up above the waves for a few minutes to watch them crawling along the dark roads with their 18 wheels. She'd always wondered what was inside all of them, with their colorful paints and strange names. At least she now has some idea of what Home Depot does. Part of their business model evidently involves kidnapping. To stop the panic rising up too high in her chest, the water nymph focuses on stilling the water in the fountain. All of the bumps and turns in the road, she focuses all her energy on holding all the water in place and keeping it level. If the water around her is still, maybe she won't feel so scared. It isn't really working. But at least her precious little amount of fresh water isn't spilling out all over the watertight inside of the container. She's just about convinced herself that she's used to her cage when it suddenly stops. The rumble sound cuts out, the shaking stops, and voices somewhere outside discuss what to do with her, saying words like containment protocol, initial testing, and security measures. The water nymph dips her head back below the surface of the water as the rear doors open. She's going to make the most of this. That's what she's decided. Having spent all her life underwater, observing the humans from afar, she'd always dreamed of one day meeting one. There had been moments, sure, times when she'd wave at a child on the deck of a ferry or guide a ship through the fog, but up close? Never. They look funny, these people. When you see them up close, they're such strange colors, so fleshy and hairy. It's bizarre not being able to see through them. How are they supposed to swim? These humans in particular are even more strange than the others. Dressed in long white coats, always walking around with clipboards and strange little devices that light up and make sounds when they poke them. She wonders if they get sick of having their legs stuck to the ground all the time. What if they see something interesting floating above them? They can't just swim upwards. They need to get on one of those plane things. This will be fun, getting to meet real people for the first time. She keeps telling herself that because if she doesn't, it all becomes too scary. They haven't put her back in the sea, a river, or even a pool. They've just kept her in her fountain. It sits right in the middle of a brightly lit chamber. 4 white walls, a white ceiling, and a white floor. 1 white door. The lights are always on, the temperature always the same. For days and days, she just sits in her fountain, alone. Occasionally, one of the humans will come in wearing a big rubber suit. They look totally ridiculous. Taking big, slow steps, they'll approach her fountain. The first time, she jumped up out of the water to greet the human, doing her best to wave like she's seen them do to each other. But the human immediately turned around and ran back out of the chamber. So next time, she was slow and gentle, raising both her hands innocently and letting the human approach without doing anything. The human lowered some kind of glass container into the water in her fountain and took some of the water away. He must have been thirsty. She's seen the humans get like that sometimes. How they're not thirsty all the time, she has no clue. It doesn't look like there's a drop of water anywhere in them, except for their eyes. She tries to catch the human's eye as he leaves, but he just walks straight out of her chamber, carrying away the little container of water. But this time, she has an idea. She waits patiently for a few days, waiting for another one of the humans to come and see her. It's hard to tell how much time has passed because it's always sunny in here, but it must have been a few days by now. Sure enough, the door opens, and a human in another big rubber costume comes in. She rises out of the water slowly so as not to scare them and lets her form melt and shift. Feeling her body flow into a different shape, she does her best to copy the human's big rubber suit. She's practiced this for years in the sea, copying the shapes of different humans she sees. The human stops walking and stares at her. She tries to wave again. The human waves back. Success! For almost a minute, they stand there waving at each other. She knows this is longer than most humans would wave at each other, but it's just so exciting she can't help herself. Maybe this will be her first friend. Imagine that, having a human friend. The human takes a hesitant step towards her. This is her chance. Lifting herself up and out of the water, The nymph steps out of her fountain for the first time. She pauses, careful not to spook the human. They do scare very easily, but this time, he stays. Better than that, he takes another step towards her, then another until they're within touching distance. She can feel the water beating in her chest, pumping excitedly through her body. The human has another one of those glass containers in its hand. It raises the container up slowly for her to look at. She leans in to see why this strange little creature is showing her a piece of glass. She's seen these 1,000 times before in the seas. There's glass and plastic everywhere for her to look at. What's so special about this one? The human takes a swipe at her. The glass container strikes the side of her head and extracts a chunk of water. She staggers away, hands raised in fear. What had she done wrong? Why did the human do that to her? She feels faint. Her head swims and not in the usual pleasant way. Her body works hard to redistribute all the water around her body, rebuilding that part of herself in a split second, but it doesn't stop the pain or the sudden wave of tiredness. She stumbles back into the fountain and plunges beneath the surface, letting the water merge with her body again. But the surface of the fountain isn't still. It trembles and shakes as she lies at the bottom in fear. Why had the human done that to her? By the time she has the courage to peek out of the water again, the human is gone. The lights in the ceiling seem brighter than ever. The next day is the first time she really misses the sea. She would race from coast to coast, feeling herself getting dragged along in the ocean gyres as she flowed between continents. She would study the rainbow colors of the Great Barrier Reef before catching a current to Venice or Jamaica. She'd hug the bottom of cruise ships and dance in and out of the propellers on the backs of cargo ships. But here, in her cell, all she can do is swim around her fountain, round and round in circles. That is, until the humans return. 3 of them come into her room, each carrying strange long objects. She's not sure she's seen those things before and is desperate for a closer look. But after what happened with the glass the other day, it doesn't seem like a good idea. She still hasn't worked out what she did wrong there, but clearly the human was not happy with her for some reason. Best to be very gentle with them for the time being, until they're proper friends. The 3 humans have a box with them, full of water. She's so excited to see it, she leaps straight out of the fountain before realizing she needs to be careful. Patiently as she can, she approaches the box and touches it. The humans nod encouragingly. Her excitement overwhelms her, and she dives right in. It feels so good to have fresh water to explore, even if it's just a small tank. She barely even notices as they close the lid on her and wheel her into a different room. A glass wall lines the edge of this new chamber. Funny little humans in white coats stand behind it, making notes. She climbs out of her little tank and waves at them. It's a smaller room than her normal one. Why have they brought her in here? A slamming noise behind her makes her jump, and she spins around to see the 3 humans have wheeled away her little tanks on wheels, leaving her alone in the room. She looks around with a little anxiety. There's nowhere to swim in here. Have they made a mistake? She can't be here without water. Doing her best to copy human movements, she tries to mime to the people behind the glass that she needs her water. They don't seem to understand her, just start scribbling even more things on their clipboards. It's warm in here. Warm and dry. This isn't good. In no time at all, she can feel herself drying out. An hour goes by, then another. She's never been out of the water for this long. What are they doing? Don't they understand what she is? Her head starts to feel faint. She slumps down on the floor and turns herself into a ball. Shaped like this, hopefully, she won't be evaporating so fast. Then they'll give her the water back. For hours she sits in a ball, waiting, until mercifully, her little tank on wheels returns, and she's taken back to her fountain. They do the same to her the next day, and the day after that, starving her for hours, then returning her to her fountain. They top up the water in it occasionally, but other than that, they don't seem to be doing anything nice for her at all. Are they doing this on purpose? Surely not. She's their friend. She's being kind, doing all of their weird games even when she doesn't want to. Humans aren't cruel, they wouldn't do that to her. But then she finds herself in a different situation entirely. They do the same as they've been doing for the previous few days, wheeling her into the testing chamber and making her stand there on her own. But it's colder today, much colder. She tries to explain to them through the glass, rubbing her shoulders and shivering, but they just keep making their notes. This isn't good. She can't stand the cold. It's not good for her. Painful crystals start forming on the surface of her skin, stabbing into her and solidifying her body. She cries out noiselessly, but the humans keep going until she feels herself losing consciousness. Weeks go by, and with each experiment they do, the water nymph worries more and more that these humans aren't really her friends. They've started giving her mazes, complex plastic structures that she gets forced unceremoniously into, where she has to swim through various pipes and tubes until she can push a button on the other side. At first, she was expecting a prize. Maybe this is why they had her kept here for so long. They needed help solving these puzzles, and their fleshy bodies couldn't fit through the tubes. But nothing happens when she presses the button. They just pull a plug and drain her out of the bottom. Today, she's had enough. When are they going to put her back in the ocean? She's just going to wait here at the start of the maze until they tell her. It's only fair. The water in her chest leaps for joy as a human enters the test chamber and approaches her. She raises out of the water and waves to greet him, just as he lifts the long, strange device in his hand and jabs it into her chest. The electricity shoots all through her body and sets her mind ablaze. It takes all her strength not to burst into 1,000 droplets. Convulsing and crying, she falls backwards into the maze. The human brandishes the weapon at her again. She has nowhere to go but into the maze. She solves it in a split second, but as she presses the button, she feels a sinking feeling settling over her. What if they don't want to let her out? It's all her fault. What was she thinking? Her one shot at making friends, and she'd blown it. She sits crying in her fountain, feeling her tears flow into the water around her and back into her body. It was the acid. She hates acid, and always has. She'd swam near a factory once and got a dose of it. It hurt more than anything she'd ever felt before. It would flow into her chest and sit there, burning and burning. She can still feel it now. So when the humans in the rubber suits had poured some into her fountains, she'd lost her temper, slamming into them with all her force. For months, they've been hurting her, jabbing her, and exhausting her. But they're her friends, right? And you shouldn't hurt your friends. You definitely shouldn't kill your friends. Shouldn't rip open their rubber suits and force yourself down their throats, drowning them in their own bodies. Her fountain's red with blood and burns from the acid. And it's all her fault. What had she done wrong to make them treat her like this? Why couldn't they just be friends? After a few weeks, a group of humans come in and clean up the mess, refilling her fountain with clean water. She doesn't lift her head above the surface. They install a pipe above her fountain that drip feeds water onto her. Drip, drip, drip. And just like that, she's no longer seen as human. Drip, drip, drip. The lights burn white. The door stays closed. Drip, drip, drip. The water nymph sits in her fountain. Drip, drip, drip. After a year, she stops crying. A year after that, she gives up on thinking, too. 3 years of near silence pass, with only the sound of dripping water from the pipe, until the door to her chamber opens. Something flutters in her chest. She lifts her head out of the water. A friend? A young woman steps onto her bathroom scale. She holds her breath and squeezes her eyes shut, afraid to see the results as she listens to the dial spinning. When it slows to a stop, she opens her eyes and looks down. She balks at the result. 150 pounds! That's unacceptable in her eyes. She steps off the scale and examines her reflection in the full-length mirror. In truth, her weight is far from out of control, but when she looks at herself, she can't help but see flaws. The subtle ring of pudge around her middle, the way her butt sticks out just a little too far for her liking, the very faint thickness around her cheeks and chin that hint at her history of snacking. As she leaves the bathroom, she reflects on her situation. Of course she's gaining weight. How could it be any other way? For the last 2 years, she's been in lockdown during a pandemic, and she's barely left her apartment. She let her gym membership lapse, and instead of cycling to work, she's instead taking the easy way out by just driving. And it's not like she gets much exercise in her free time either. During these last 2 years of isolation, she's mostly stayed in and watched television. She's discovered a particular love for trashy daytime talk shows and court dramas. Intellectually, she knows that they're the equivalent of junk food, but at the same time, there is a certain mindless charm to them. She would be embarrassed to admit it to any of her friends, but she does enjoy just turning off her brain and absorbing some silly talk show about professional stunt dwarves or Satan-worshipping furry juggalos. That sort of entertainment has been a boon to get her through the tough times. Nevertheless, it's time to make a change. She promises herself that she's going to get into shape. Today, instead of vegging out on the couch, she's going to make an effort. She's going to go out and get some exercise, and she tells herself she's going to watch those extra pounds melt away right before her eyes. She hopes that her old gym clothes will still fit her. After all, she's definitely put on some extra weight since her last trip to the gym. She quickly changes her clothes and is relieved to see that, although they might be a little snugger than she would like, they still fit her pretty well. That's a good sign. She probably won't even have to work very hard to get herself down to her ideal weight. It's all a matter of willpower, she tells herself. I was fit before, so that means I should be able to do it again. All I have to do is avoid temptation. I'll just have to make sure I stay active instead of watching trash TV all day. After all, I don't want to rot my brain too much. On the first day, she actually does an admirable job of sticking to her plan. She cycles to work, enjoying the fresh air and the reassuring post-workout burn in her legs that let her know that she's making progress. She throws away all the junk food in her refrigerator and goes shopping for healthy fruits and vegetables. And, most important of all, she limits her television time. She knows that trashy TV is probably her biggest addiction, even more than junk food, so she needs to be careful of that. On the second day, though, she notices something strange. She starts off with a simple, healthy breakfast, just some granola and a glass of juice. It's barely enough to satisfy her, but she knows that she has to make sacrifices if she expects to actually lose any weight. After breakfast, she decides to go out for a jog. As she's out on the street, she's overcome with sudden hunger. Of course, that's to be expected. She's on a diet now, so it's going to take some time to adjust to these smaller meals. She puts her hand to her rumbling stomach and grimaces. She's never felt this hungry before. If she didn't know better, she would think that she hadn't eaten for a week with the amount of pain that she's feeling. In fact, she's actually starting to feel a little woozy, and she has to lean against a light post to keep from fainting. Her eyes stray to a nearby coffee shop. She sighs in relief. She thinks to herself, I'll just pop in there and get myself a small snack, just a little something to keep my blood sugar up. She walks into the cafe and gets in line. As she waits, she is really hungry. She fully intends to only get a bagel with a little smear of cream cheese, but when she gets to the counter, she finds herself ordering way too much food. I'd like 2 scones, 3 danishes, and a bear claw, she says. Also a large super raspberry frappuccino with extra syrup and whipped cream. The words just tumble out of her mouth, almost as if it's not her saying them, but rather some other voice speaking through her mouth. What the? I didn't say that, she stammers. The clerk behind the counter eyes her strangely, and the young woman feels too embarrassed to protest further. She steps aside and waits for her order, pondering the strange event that just happened. Is she possessed? She's not a superstitious person, but she can't think of any other explanation for what just happened. She can admit to herself that she has broken down and lost to temptation over a tasty snack in the past, but this is ridiculous. Eventually, when the clerk hands her the order, she rationalizes the whole thing away. I must just be having a hunger hallucination, she says to herself. Obviously, I need to be a little more careful about not being so strict about my diet. I'm sure if I just eat sensibly, I won't have an experience like that again. Her stomach grumbles again, reminding her of the original reason why she stepped into this coffee shop. She retreats to a table in the corner and tears open the bag. She wolfs down her pastries with gusto and slurps at her rich, creamy drink. When she's finished, she sighs in satisfaction, although the uncomfortable, full feeling in her belly reminds her of her predicament. She only meant to eat enough to keep her from fainting, but instead, she's eating herself silly, and it's only day 2 of the diet. This does not bode well. Okay, she tells herself, this is my last cheat. From now on, I'm going to be serious about this diet. She stands up and leaves the cafe, ready to complete the rest of her jog. But then, something even stranger happens. On the television, the matriarch of the family is furious. She has forbidden her daughter from marrying the gardener because she believes that he is too low class for her high-born daughter. But what she doesn't realize is that her daughter is in love and that she is determined to make it work. The daughter and the gardener have eloped, and the matriarch is hiring a private detective to track them down. Meanwhile, the matriarch's long-lost twin brother, whom she thought died in a plane crash in the tropics, has actually been alive the entire time. He has been in a South American hospital recovering from amnesia, but now he returns to the family estate, ready to claim his share of the inheritance. These events are all noted by the family's shady lawyer, who has big plans to usurp the family fortune himself. Unbeknownst to the family, he is actually secretly working for their mortal enemies and business rivals to destroy them. The young woman laughs, shoving a handful of potato chips into her mouth. Oh man, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes now. That lawyer is playing them all like fiddles. Suddenly, she startles, as if she's just waking up. Where is she? Wasn't she just in that coffee shop? How is it that she's at home? And why is she eating potato chips? She was sure that she threw out all the junk food in the house. She must have bought a bag on her way back home from jogging, but she literally cannot remember it. And what is she doing now? Watching television and eating junk food? In disgust, she grabs the remote and shuts off the TV. She was supposed to be jogging, and instead, she's sitting at home and watching stupid soap operas. The thing that worries her the most is her apparent blackout. She remembers nothing about her trip home from the coffee shop, although the evidence of the potato chip bag indicates that she must have stopped at a convenience store or supermarket on the way home. How could she forget something like that? I really must be having a blood sugar issue, she tells herself reassuringly, even though deep down, she knows that can't be the case. She had the blackout after eating the pastries at the coffee shop, so that can't be the cause. But she really doesn't want to think about that, so she puts it out of her head with a renewed promise to commit to her exercise and fitness program. Over the next few days, she makes a valiant effort to keep her promise. She cycles when she can, she jogs when she remembers, and yet, the blackouts continue. And no matter where she is when she loses her memory, she always recovers in the same place. Back home on her couch, always in the middle of eating some fatty junk food, always staring at the television set. Sure, she's always had an unhealthy television habit, and she knows that trashy talk shows and silly soap operas are her biggest weakness, but it doesn't make any sense that she would be seeking them out when she's in some kind of fugue state, right? As the weeks roll by, the young woman finds that her weight keeps rising. When she steps onto the bathroom scale, she's shocked to see that the dial points to 200 pounds. She's doing everything right, she thinks. How is that possible? How is it possible that she's ballooned up an extra 50 pounds since deciding to slim down? She can't fit into her old gym clothes anymore. She can barely tug the spandex shorts up to her thighs, and even if she could, she's afraid that they're going to split apart. In desperation, she switches to an old stretchy sweatsuit. It's the only thing that she owns that still fits her. This is just a temporary setback, she tells herself as she stares at her bloated reflection in the bathroom mirror. I just have to work harder. And she does. Or does she? When she goes to ride her bike, she finds that it's no longer strong enough to support her weight. She can't perch on the seat comfortably, and the steel body frame starts to creak when she rests her full weight upon it. She steels her resolve. Sure, it might be embarrassing to go out in public wearing an ill-fitting sweatsuit and riding a bike groaning under her bulk, but she really has no choice. This time, she's going to do it. And she probably did ride her bike to work, right? She's not sure. The next thing that she knows, she's back at home, spread across the couch, basking in the comforting glow of the television. The floor is covered in empty bags and cartons, and her face is slathered with crumbs and sauce. The last thing that she remembers is that she was just about to go for a bike ride, but now she's back at home, and it looks like she just completely ruined her diet. She's longest blackout yet. She must have gone out cycling and made her way home, where she tries to reassure herself that maybe she's past the worst of it, but she finds that these mysterious blackouts keep happening. They happen while she's at work, while she's at the gym, while she's out cycling, but she always comes to in the same place, sitting on her sofa at home, in front of the TV, surrounded by the debris of a massive meal. Again, she wonders if maybe she's having some sort of reaction to her new low-calorie diet. Maybe she's been cutting back so far on her food intake that she's starting to have fainting spells. Maybe her diet food is tainted in some way. But that doesn't explain why she keeps gaining weight. The scale in her bathroom doesn't lie. It keeps reporting higher and higher numbers, and as much as she tries to reassure herself that it must just be broken, her ever-tightening clothes and ever-widening reflection tell her otherwise. Her trips to the gym become less and less frequent, as she finds that other patrons have started to stare and whisper about her. Are they laughing at her for not being able to control her weight? Are they whispering about how her new flab is spilling from the confines of her sweatsuit? She can't even run on the treadmill for more than a few minutes without being completely winded, and she's too wide to balance on her bike now. The young woman has grown absolutely massive, to the point that she completely fills the whole couch. She chews her way through yet another bag of potato chips, her eyes never straying from the ever-chattering television set. She barely moves from the spot, her tremendous girth sinking into a permanent groove in the cushions as the couch springs groan. She barely notices, however, because she's much too intent on enjoying herself. She loves to eat, and every bite brings her untold joy, her taste buds tingling with delight. She is constantly full, so much so that she feels slightly sick. She scarfs down entire boxes of cookies and cartons of ice cream without a thought, having turned into the very definition of a mindless eater. Only occasionally does she rouse herself from this stupor of gorging. Other than eating, her attention is completely devoted to her television set. She watches a constant stream of daytime talk shows, laughing along with the studio audience as the hosts parade out an assortment of society's biggest freaks. Sometimes she'll switch the channel to watch soap operas, becoming so wrapped up in the ridiculous plot twists and melodramatic acting that she completely forgets the passage of time. Her bicycle stands propped against the wall in the hallway, completely forgotten and untouched now for months. At this point, all thoughts of losing weight have utterly evaporated, and all that she cares about is satisfying her appetites for junk food and junk television. One day, she suddenly shakes her head and looks down at herself in horror, as if seeing herself for the first time. What the? she says in disbelief. She drops her half-eaten carton of ice cream and grabs at her fleshy middle with her hands, as if to make sure that it's all her and not some kind of crazy dream. Her hands sink deep into her new flesh, and she realizes to her shock that indeed she has eaten herself into morbid obesity. How is this possible? I can't be this big. I was only... Her words trail off as the sound of an organ sting from the soap opera on TV diverts her attention. Within seconds, her eyes have glazed over, and her hands move to pick up the dropped carton of ice cream. Her worries about her growing size forgotten, she's now only concerned with watching until the next commercial break. It might seem unbelievable that someone could undergo such a startling physical and mental transformation, but what that young woman experienced has led to her being classified by the Foundation as SCP-2611. SCP-2611 is, as you might have expected, a young woman currently weighing approximately 500 pounds. Her mobility is limited due to her weight, although SCP staff encourage her to take light exercise whenever possible, in hopes of preventing her mobility from deteriorating further. She also suffers from several health issues related to her weight and lifestyle, including diabetes, for which she is receiving treatment by Foundation personnel. Her awareness of her situation and surroundings is severely limited, as she spends most of her time in a stupor, but when she is lucid, she believes that she is in a special facility receiving treatment for her weight problem. In reality, SCP-2611 is under observation because of SCP-2611-1. SCP-2611-1 is a mass of sentient fat located on SCP-2611's left side. SCP-2611-1 has become integrated with several of SCP-2611's vital organs, making it too dangerous to attempt to remove SCP-2611-1 via liposuction or other means. SCP-2611-1 has gradually exerted increasing control over the mind and actions of its host, to the point that SCP-2611 is only fully conscious for 1 to 2 hours daily. The rest of the time, SCP-2611-1 is fully in control of its host's behavior. Prior to coming to the SCP facility, SCP-2611-1 influenced its host to consume massive amounts of calories, leading to the mysterious and sudden weight gain that we observed earlier. This was possibly an attempt by SCP-2611-1 to increase its own size and influence, but as of yet, its reasons, as well as how it exerts control over its host, are unknown. When in control, SCP-2611-1 can speak through its host, communicating in standard American English. Attempts to communicate with SCP-2611-1 have so far met with little success due to the anomaly's limited attention span for anything other than the minutiae of daytime television. In a conversation with one researcher, however, SCP-2611-1 let slip that it preferred daytime television to the programming watched by, quote, that other guy, suggesting that it lived inside a different host before it eventually took up residence within the body, but rather the voice of SCP-2611 trying to break through the hypnotic control of her parasite to call for help. At this time, no drastic action is recommended until further observations can be made. SCP-2611-1 does not appear to be contagious, and the way that it bonds with the host is unknown, so it is currently classified as safe. At the moment, SCP-2611-1 is the only known instance of its kind. However, considering rising levels of obesity worldwide, it is not unfathomable to think that there could be countless other instances influencing the behavior of other hosts to dedicate their lives to consuming food and television. Who knows? It's not like most of us would need that much convincing.
The flashlight beam casts demonic shadows that twist and shift with the trembling of his hands. It makes the feeling worse, seeing those shadows twitch against the walls like they're somehow alive. But shadows can't be alive, can they? Another noise, a creak that sounds distinctly like the weight of someone's soul against the floorboard. Now the man knows he hasn't been imagining it. The beam of light sweeps over the room towards the source of the noise, to reveal the source of his torment is nothing. There's nothing there. And yet every feeling, every instinct, tells him that his eyes are wrong. Listen closer. Someone's here. And yet, there's no one. Not a soul. The man sighs. He swears he thought someone had gotten inside. He decides to double-check, creating more dancing, unsettling shadows with his flashlight as he scans the rest of the living room. Nothing again. Then the kitchen. Still nothing. Back upstairs to the landing. Nobody but him. And in the bedroom? He's alone again. But he doesn't feel alone. In fact, he feels the opposite, the undeniable presence of someone else there. or something else. He switches the flashlight back off and stays still. There's no point in trying to sleep now. The uncertainty of it all is bound to keep him awake. So he stands there, surrounded by the dark and the silence, just waiting for the next sign. Another creak, breathing, a footstep, anything. Even in the dark, it's like he can feel the eyes on him. The back of his neck bristles, hairs standing to attention like a breath passing over his skin. What if it is? What if it's right there, right behind him? The flashlight is back on in a second as he turns around. The light illuminates the space behind him, and there's still nothing there. But despite finding no sign of anyone else in the apartment, despite knowing for certain he's alone, the man doesn't feel alone. It feels like there's someone watching. In fact, it's always felt like there's someone watching. Has this ever happened to you? Of course it has. Most of us, if not all of us, have at one point or another experienced that same sinister sensation. You hear something move, only to see nothing out of place. What sounds like a footstep turns out to be just the foundations of your house settling. And all the while, you can't escape that uncanny and unnerving feeling that somebody's watching you. Could they be across the street, peering in through your window? Or maybe, just maybe, they're inside, right behind you, hiding in the only place you would never look. You might write this off as just paranoia, a primal, self-preserving instinct passed down from our earliest ancestors, going haywire as it keeps a lookout for imminent threats when there are none. But it's not that. Not at all. It's both out there and in your head, all around nearly wherever you go. And it's always watching. They call it causal SCP Foundation wants you to know, and it's not hard to see why. After all, it removes that unsettling sense of mystery, the unknown factor of it all. Chalking it up to stress or overactive imagination, it reminds you not to worry and that it's all just your mind playing tricks on you. But it isn't. Your brain is working fine and is, in fact, warning you of danger. And that danger is SCP-3010. The Foundation's research has uncovered that the feeling of being watched stems from something very, very real, an undetectable entity that they have designated SCP-3010-1. You might be better acquainted with it as that brief dash of movement out of the corner of your eye, or the noises you can't explain. In other words, the things that go bump in the night. But if you ever get that feeling, like someone else is staring at you, observing you against your will, then that's your best indicator. You're not alone. It's in the room with you, and it's watching. Always watching. It doesn't happen every time. None of us are going around constantly feeling like some unseen entity is watching us. At least, the lucky ones aren't. While manifestations of the entity are somewhat random and inconsistent, the SCP Foundation has determined that certain requirements can first be met in order to deliberately cause SCP-3010-1 to successfully manifest. These specifics relate to the space that a person is currently inhabiting. For starters, anything too small won't work, so that's any tight or cramped spaces, single rooms, or sterile environments that are shut off from the outside world, like hospitals or prisons. Foundation containment cells also fall into this latter category. But anything bigger, particularly in houses or living spaces comprised of at least 500 square meters in terms of floor space, are prime real estate for the entity, SCP-3010-1, especially if the lights are turned down low, if not switched off completely, and if there's only one living person present inside. Now, if you were expecting that the moment you're next home alone, that you could just turn out the lights and summon SCP-3010-1, then you'd be wrong. At any rate, we wouldn't recommend trying it. Little is known about the entity itself. It has hardly anything in the way of physical traits that the Foundation knows about. In terms of where it first came from, why it depends on stalking and observing humans, or even what it wants, there are no answers. The Foundation has, however, learned the following things about SCP-3010-1. For one, it is totally imperceptible. It can't be observed at all, not in any perceivable wavelength of light. So put down the thermals and night vision goggles or the UV light, the only surefire way to tell, or rather, guess, where it is at any given time, is after any kind of reactive incident with the entity. Secondly, the Foundation has noticed that SCP-3010-1 interacts differently with human beings who display the symptoms of avoidant disorders. This can include those suffering from social anxiety or inhibition, or who are typically withdrawn. Around a full half of people with these avoidant disorders will not react to scenarios wherein the entity manifests. In short, the reactive events caused by SCP-3010-1 often don't affect those with avoidant disorders, or at least 50% of those people. However, the half that the entity can interact with often feels the effects of SCP-3010 with a lot more intensity. The unnerving feeling of being watched becomes full-blown, inescapable paranoia. As for what exactly SCP-3010-1 looks like, the Foundation is at a loss. Given the entity can't be perceived, it makes getting a witness sketch or a mugshot somewhat tricky. However, there is one thing that the SCP Foundation knows for sure. It does have the limitations of a physical form. This isn't an incorporeal, ethereal ghost that can phase through walls and other solid objects. SCP-3010-1 has a physical presence, and it seems to have an awareness of this. It's for that reason it won't manifest in smaller spaces like single-occupant rooms or particular places with no windows or doors like Foundation containment cells. Those who actively seek out or attempt to hunt the entity, especially with the intent to destroy it, are more likely to cause SCP-3010-1 to manifest. Sometimes it's worth trying to ignore the ominous sound of creaking coming from deep within your house rather than going looking for what made it. Anyone spending a prolonged period of time around mirrors is also likely to trigger a manifestation. The same can be said for those in unlit or dimly lit rooms, along with those who endure a long period of isolated, continuous silence, or make any attempt to call anyone else for help. With enough of these factors met, enough space, a lack of lighting, and no more or less than one person in a room or house, SCP-3010-1 will manifest and trigger what is known as a reactive event. This can be achieved by doing anything that increases the adrenaline levels of an isolated person, from creepy noises to the instinctive sensation that comes from being directly watched. Those few who have managed to survive their encounters with the entity have described the symptoms of SCP-3010 coming from behind. They will experience the observation or presence of another being coming from directly behind them. Should they find themselves backed against a wall, they will feel compelled to avoid the nearest window or dark corner. Mirrors are also a cause of major aversion for these victims, often causing those experiencing causal absent paranoia to flee to other rooms without any reflective surfaces present. Anyone currently undergoing the effects of SCP-3010 additionally will not be able to just sleep it off either. The symptoms caused by the impending presence of the entity directly inhibit a person's ability to fall asleep, not just out of fear, but due to a fundamental function of SCP-3010-1. The entity can manipulate the areas of the human brain that are responsible for the production of melatonin, the induction of sleep states, and the regulation of dreams. The SCP Foundation has discovered this disruption to sleep is caused by a gaseous substance that is dispersed into the local atmosphere. In order to avoid detection by the public, this phenomenon has also been given a medical classification: causal absent paranoia-induced insomnia. Being unable to sleep or escape the feelings of being watched, the observed victim will inevitably panic. This is what prompts the reactive event. Usually, SCP-3010-1 will manifest through mirrors or windows. Upon manifestation, the entity then proceeds to kill its target. It extracts some vital material from their body, then sucks what is left of them into the breach that it emerged from. When a reactive event has been triggered, SCP-3010-1 deploys a cognitohazardous effect as well. This total memory erasure acts in the way you might expect. Any memories of the targeted person involved in an SCP-3010-1 manifestation will be quickly destroyed. Anyone who might remember them, might think to check on them if they've been missing for a time, will cease to have any recollection of said person. Once the entity has them, it's as if they no longer exist. Of course, this total memory erasure can be circumvented with enough written evidence of a person's existence kept at all times, or with a number of Scranton reality anchors active in the nearby area. Once it has successfully manifested, retrieved a target, and dispatched them, some Foundation researchers believe that SCP-3010-1 enters into a state of stasis. This is known to attract reflective surfaces in the surrounding area, making mirrors or windows appear opaque. Symptoms associated with SCP-3010 are also experienced by any and all human beings within a certain radius of the reactive event. So even if you start to feel like there's someone watching you and look over your shoulder to find no one's there, then you could still be in the clear. Although, that might mean someone nearby wasn't as lucky as you were. Following the manifestation, the immediate vicinity of the completed reactive event will undergo a rapid deconstruction. A spatial anomaly takes place, causing the room or location where the target has recently been taken from to expand into a number of tight, dark corridors and various small rooms that will each be filled with mirrors and other reflective surfaces. To date, the Foundation has only recorded a handful of these reactive events, and thankfully, the spatial anomaly that triggers in their wake will normally dissipate after several hours. However, the paranoid symptoms of SCP-3010 will persist in the local area, which has led some researchers to question the validity of the entity going into stasis. There are those who believe it doesn't take breaks. While avoidant personality disorders can either have an extreme repelling or extreme attracting effect on an SCP-3010-1 entity, those with an excessive compulsion for human interaction, in particular sociopaths, produce a far different and far stranger effect on the entity. Sociopathy is a mental health condition wherein somebody will consistently show that they have a lack of regard for the moral notions of right and wrong. While not all are violent, many sociopaths will often ignore the feelings of others, unless they are attempting to manipulate those feelings. For example, appeasing somebody else to make themselves seem more likable and thus garner validation. Interactions between sociopaths and instances of SCP-3010-1 will often lead to the causation of several severe anomalies. One such sociopath has been incarcerated under the SCP Foundation, serving as a member of D-Class, the disposable subgroup of personnel comprised of violent criminals who often find themselves acting as human test subjects for anomalous experiments. This D-Class, D17729, also known as Mike, is selected for testing involving SCP-3010. A D-Class is placed, typically one that exhibits extremely reclusive tendencies. They are not told of the existence of SCP-3010-1, nor are they told what the entities are capable of. The D-Class in these houses must each believe that they are well and truly isolated, abandoned alone with the entity. Mike, being one of the D-Class assigned to an SCP-3010-1 containment house, has a video and audio recording device surgically implanted within his body before he awakens inside the dummy house. Confused, he examines his surroundings, searching the area for signs of anyone else living in what he momentarily believes is a real household. He traverses from the bedroom, down the hallways towards the staircase, leading from the upper floor down to a foyer. All the while, early symptoms of SCP-3010 begin to surface. Mike checks behind himself as though he's starting to feel like someone is watching him. He tries to convince himself that he's alone. There's nobody behind him. Making a move for the front door, Mike finds he can't open it. He's sealed inside the house. Over the course of the next 3 hours, he navigates his way across the entire containment cell, occasionally musing to himself. More rapidly, he begins to experience the unnerving symptoms of causal absent paranoia, developing an aversion to the darker areas of the house. A few days later, Mike finds himself keeping all the lights on and deliberately avoiding mirrors. He has to practically argue with himself that he's not afraid of the dark, just in order to go downstairs to the storage room for food. On his eventual way down there, he thinks he spots something in the house with him. Fleeing for his life, he locks himself in the storage room for an entire day, preferring to stay where there is food and light. Within a day, his SCP-3010 has become so bad that he's convinced there's something in the containment house with him. He fashions the shelving units from the storeroom into a makeshift barricade. Following his first whole week in containment with an SCP-3010-1 entity, Mike has stayed put in the storage room. He uses additional light fixtures to keep the room bright and begins tearing wiring out of the walls with the use of a makeshift crowbar. Thanks to his previous experience as an electrical engineer, after 9 days, he then creates a makeshift suit covered in light fixtures powered by a portable, hand-crank generator. Donning his light suit, Mike sets out to find and destroy SCP-3010-1, something we know only attracts it more. But after searching the containment cell for 4 hours, Mike falls asleep. This is incredibly rare in the presence of SCP-3010-1 instances, if not impossible. When he reawakens, he not only finds the storage room resupplied by Foundation personnel, but also that the lights have all been put out. Frantically, almost completely unhinged at this point, Mike looks for a weapon to fight any SCP-3010-1 he can find. The next day sees Mike rapidly searching through the containment house for SCP-3010-1 entities. Thinking he's found one, he rushes towards it while exclaiming he has light and for the entity to come out. When he approaches, an SCP-3010-1 reactive event starts, but unlike the other recorded instances, seems to fail. 3 mirrors nearby start to produce a low level of light, causing Mike to investigate. The moment he makes contact with one of the mirrors, he screams. The connection to his recording device is lost, and the containment site undergoes a spatial anomaly. In the interest of recovering any evidence of this different reactive event and finding whatever remains of Mike, the SCP Foundation dispatches a team to investigate the ruined containment site. This unit is comprised primarily of the 8 members belonging to Mobile Task Force 066, also codenamed 8 Blind Men. Led by their captain, the unit is also overseen by a Foundation researcher named Dr. Obrent. As the team enters the ruins of the containment house, they maintain a clear line of communication with Dr. Obrent via radio. With no idea what will happen once the team is inside, everyone is on high alert, told to look out for cognitohazards or any interruptions of their mental faculties. Upon entry, everything goes quiet. For 10 long minutes, there isn't a word from the team. Then comes the eventual report from the captain. The spatial anomaly is in full effect. Dr. Obrent remarks on the long delay of 10 minutes, but the captain insists that, from his and the team's point of view, it was only 30 seconds. They quickly reach the conclusion that the spatial anomaly triggered by an SCP-3010-1 reactive event has, this time, resulted in time dilation. The team navigates their way through a repeating series of hallways, finding themselves in a copy of the foyer of the ruined containment site. It's only then that the captain realizes something is wrong. The team is down a man, MTF-066-8, but his men are confused. They tell him that there are only 7 members of MTF-066. Dr. Obrent concurs. The captain then points out that MTF-066-6 and MTF-066-7 are also both missing. Once again, the rest of the team insists they've never even heard of those people. Their team has always had 5 members. It's as if they can't remember, or their comrades have been erased from existence. 8 blind men were rapidly whittled down from 5 to 3 to just 1. The captain was lost and alone, frantic and paranoid. His remains are never recovered, and before long, the Foundation is forced to accept that their mobile task force, the 3 blind men, have all been killed in action, with no sign of the missing D-Class D-17729. But a series of unauthorized addendums have been left on the SCP-3010 file in the Foundation's archive. They seem to have been left by Mike, who recalls his old D-Class designation number. He describes being lost in a series of endless dark halls with only a few small rooms. He says that they probably hate it here because it's a waste of all their eyes. The entity has eyes. They've got eyes in the back of their head. They've got eyes in the back of their mouth. They don't like us, Foundation, but they watch us. They watch us for so long. Why do they hate us, Foundation? Why do they hate me? Why is it so dark? The addendum from Mike ends with him describing his entity coming out of the mirror. He says there's one for every room, right behind him, right behind you, right behind all of us.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning on a work night, and the last of the bar hoppers and clubgoers have long since turned in. At the end of the street, the last bar is finally closing down for the night. Or it would, except that the bartender is having trouble getting rid of a customer. Sitting at the bar, an old derelict is demanding yet another drink. The bartender grumbles in annoyance. This derelict is sloppy drunk, and the bartender just wants to go home. "Closing time," growls the bartender. "Just one more," protests the derelict, shaking his empty glass for emphasis. "I've got money." He laughs at his own words, his giggles ending with a loud belch that blows a cloud of aromatic vapor into the bartender's face. That's it. This derelict has been hanging out at this bar causing trouble all night, and the bartender has had enough. "Get out of here," says the bartender as he hustles the wobbling derelict out the door. "You're done." The derelict creaks and totters as he stumbles out into the street. The night's festivities are really hitting him. It isn't so often that he's got the money to burn, but when he does, he likes to spend it here. The prices are right, and the conversation is minimal, which is just the way that he likes it. The derelict turns around, fire in his eyes. He's raring to fight, and he doesn't care that the bartender is quite a bit larger than he is. Right now, all he can see is red. "Don't tell me when I've had enough," he slurs, raising his fists as he prepares to lash out. But the bartender has already slammed the door in his face. Defeated, the derelict turns his back on the closed bar and starts a slow stumble down the street. "Stupid bartender," mutters the derelict, turning up his collar against the cold bite of the night air. He wishes that he just had one more drink to warm his stomach against the chill. He's so out of it that he doesn't stop to think that the bartender did him a favor by refusing to fight. There is no way that the derelict would have won that battle. Even if he was in his physical prime, even if the bartender wasn't twice his size, the derelict is in no shape to fight. His vision is blurry and his head is swimming. In fact, he can barely remain upright. If he had any sense, he would probably stumble home and sleep this off. But the night is young, and he's not ready to give up yet. He walks down the street, eyeing every storefront in hopes of finding another bar. Unfortunately, every window has a closed sign in it. He swears under his breath. What a run of bad luck. What's a guy supposed to do in this town, he wonders. Just when he's about to give up hope, he spies something glinting in the reflective halo of a street lamp. He stumbles closer to get a better look, and he can hardly believe his eyes. Finally, his luck is changing. Someone has abandoned a half-empty bottle. "Well, hello there, little friend," says the derelict. He struggles to focus, but the world is spinning. In his confusion, he could swear he's seeing things. But no, he can feel the heft of the glass bottle in his hand, and he knows that it is as real as he is. "Who left you behind? Who would leave a perfectly good bottle just sitting out here?" He recognizes this brand. There's only about 3 fingers of liquid left, but that's better than nothing. Some people might balk at drinking out of a random bottle that you found on the street, but the derelict doesn't give it a second thought. He tips the bottle back and slurps it all down. It burns going down, just as it should, he thinks. He sighs in contentment as he feels the harsh liquid warm his stomach. Perfect. That really hit the spot. But what happens next surprises him so much that he can't believe his eyes. There's still liquid in the bottle. He blinks, wondering if maybe his adult brain is playing tricks on him, but he shakes the bottle cautiously and is rewarded with the telltale swish of liquid. That's no illusion. He takes another swig, guzzling it down. Normally, he'd drop the bottle to the ground and stumble on, but something makes him pause. He maintains his grip on the bottleneck and raises it again to take another look. And sure enough, there's still more left in the bottle. The derelict cannot believe his luck. He feels like he must have won the lottery. He's found a never-ending bottle. Already his mind is reeling with possibilities. "That bartender really thinks he's so smart," he mutters to himself as he weaves unsteadily. "But I don't need him anymore. See if I ever go to this stupid bar again. He just lost his best customer. Now that I have you, little bottle, I don't ever need to pay for drinks ever again." "It's the best day of my life," crows the derelict, raising his arms in triumph. He's barely able to stagger back to his home, a seedy apartment on the bad side of town, before he passes out on the floor. The morning sun rouses the slumbering derelict, and he rises with a groan. His whole body aches, and his mouth feels dry and parched. That's par for the course after a night of drinking, but somehow this hangover feels different. He puts that thought out of his mind as his mind returns to the strange, never-empty bottle that he discovered the night before. It's lying on its side on the floor next to him. He reaches for the mysterious bottle, only to find that, in fact, the previous night was not a dream. The bottle still contains just as much as it did the night before. He can't explain it, but the derelict isn't about to question his good fortune. He lifts himself to his feet and walks slowly into the bathroom. He's feeling a hangover like he's never felt before. His head is pounding and his throat is dry. His tongue feels swollen and sluggish inside his mouth, but he knows how to handle it. A little hair of the dog is all you need to help with the hangover. He takes another gulp from his bottle, but this time it brings little relief. And he notices something else strange too. It's his scalp. The skin on his head has started to itch, and he can't stop scratching. He feels like he's got the world's worst dandruff problem. He should probably take a shower, he thinks. He strips down and steps into the tub. turning the hot water on full blast and letting it wash over him. The shower only brings him temporary relief. Afterward, as he dries himself off, the towels feel rough and abrasive against his skin. His skin comes off in big, flaky patches, and his nails leave red trails in their wake. What's that? Is that blood? He examines his fingers to see that his nails have grown into ragged, claw-like talons. With a frightened yelp, he bites them off. It's easy to do. Although they look formidable, his fingernails are weak and brittle, almost as if he's dealing with a sudden calcium deficiency. What could be wrong with him? He remembers all the warnings he heard back in school when they used to march everyone into assembly to listen to lectures from the local police. At the time, he scoffed at the long lists of scary-sounding consequences of a lifetime of drinking, but now, he's not so sure. "It's probably nothing," he says as he examines himself in the bathroom mirror. His skin looks blotchy and infected. It doesn't take long before his hair and nails are out of control. His hair grows down to his shoulders, but comes out in big, ragged clumps if he runs his fingers through it. His claw-like fingernails are constantly breaking and cracking until his fingertips are bloody, and his quick is itchy and infected. If his habits had left him looking worse for wear before, he really looks awful now. For the next week, he barely leaves the apartment. He pulls the curtains and keeps the lights off, afraid that someone might see him. When the landlord bangs on the door, shouting that rent is late and demanding that the derelict hand over the money, he doesn't answer. He waits. The landlord gives up for now. That's good, thinks the derelict. It will give him time to think, time to figure out what to do about his disease. He knows that something is not right. Many of the local bartenders are, by now, probably wondering where he's gone. It's not like the derelict to stay away. He's practically kept the bar industry in this town afloat all by himself. It must be something major indeed to keep him away from his favorite poison. Luckily, he still has the bottomless bottle to comfort him during this trying time. The derelict is certain that he's caught some bad bug, but he thinks that he can wait it out. All he needs to do is make it through the next week, and everything will be fine. Sipping free drinks helps him to pass the time in a pleasant stupor as he waits for his health to return. Unfortunately, things are only going to get worse for him. His hair and fingernails keep growing, to the point that he has trouble lifting the bottle without his twisted nails getting in the way. His dry, flaky skin is changing as well, becoming thick and leathery and hanging off him in great folds like the hide of an elephant or a rhinoceros. His skin continues to grow, until the folds flop over his knees and gradually hang lower and lower until they touch the ground. Moving is harder now that he's carrying so much extra weight. He thought at first he just had a nasty bug, but he's clearly picked up some weird skin condition, and even this derelict, sodded as he might be, suspects exactly where he got it. It's got to be that crazy bottomless bottle. He can't think of another reason. Even so, he can't bring himself to part with this little gift from heaven. Even in his darkest hour, a few sips of liquid courage always helps to calm his nerves. He considers lumbering down to the free clinic in hopes that they might be able to cure him or at least tell him what's wrong with his skin. But he thinks better of this option. What if he's got some weird alien parasite that no one has ever seen before? They might lock him away in some government lab or something. No, he reasons, it's better to wait it out. He'll sleep it off, swear off the sauce for a little while, and maybe it'll pass. In desperation, the derelict drags himself across the floor, hoping to at least find some solace away from human contact. He locks himself into his bedroom while he's still able to manipulate the lock on his door. The extra folds of skin are hanging off of his hands and arms, making it hard to do anything. The extra skin is so heavy that he can't walk much carrying all that extra weight. He lies on the floor of his bedroom, away from everything, and hopes that tomorrow, when he wakes up, this will just be a fading dream. The only thing that brings him solace is the never-ending bottle, which, even now in his advanced state of decay, he keeps close by him. After all, he reasons, the damage is already done. What could possibly be the harm in enjoying a nice drink? A week later, his condition has not passed. The landlord is back, and this time he's not taking no for an answer. The landlord isn't supposed to enter his tenant's apartment without permission, but he doesn't care. He uses his own key to unlock the door and go inside. The condition of the apartment is appalling. The furniture is broken, the floor is covered with unidentifiable filth, and there's a rotten stench in the air. The landlord wants to throw up as the full weight of the musty smell hits him in the face. It's as if someone has been living in here without any ventilation, with all the windows firmly closed and sealed. A sudden noise from the bathroom draws his attention. Of course, thinks the landlord, that old bum is hiding in there. He thinks I won't find him. The landlord steals his resolve and heads towards the bathroom, determined to get the money that he feels is owed to him. But what greets him when he steps through the door isn't the derelict anymore. It isn't even human. The creature in the bathroom is a massive pile of ambulatory skin folds. The skin flaps have grown so large and cumbersome that the derelict within can barely move. They sprout all over his body, covering him so that he looks more like some kind of alien sea cucumber now than any human. The landlord stumbles backwards, screaming in terror at the sight, unable to comprehend what he's looking at. Improbably, the creature reacts to the noise, and a ripple of movement spreads across its surface. It starts to move, despite not having any legs. The landlord is so terrified that he doesn't notice the glass bottle that suddenly drops from between the creature's skin folds as it starts to move toward him. The same bottle, still with 3 fingers of liquid inside. How could something like this happen? What parasite or disease did the derelict contract from the miracle bottle he found? Sadly, this never-ending bottle isn't a boon, but a curse, and the man who found it that night became just another victim of what the SCP Foundation has classified as SCP-420. SCP-420 looks like a perfectly ordinary bottle of a certain popular libation, even to the point that it bears the label of a common brand. The bottle always contains a small amount of a mysterious liquid known as SCP-420-1. If this liquid is poured out, SCP-420 will always replenish itself. When SCP-420-1 is potent, it is physically, chemically, and molecularly indistinguishable from ordinary whiskey, although drinking will have an effect far greater than even the strongest liquor. When SCP-420-1 is poured out of SCP-420, though, it undergoes a strange transformation, eventually losing its potency and changing until it is indistinguishable physically, chemically, or molecularly from urine. Consuming potent SCP-420-1 instigates a bizarre physical transformation called SCP-420-2 in 6 stages. In Stage 1, beginning 12 hours after consumption, the subject will start to have difficulty speaking, resulting in slurred speech that is not consistent with normal alcohol inebriation. Their fingernails, toenails, and hair will start to grow at an accelerated rate, but also become brittle and prone to breakage. Nail breakage to the quick often leads to bleeding and infection. The Foundation has had some success in curing SCP-420-2 if it is caught when still in Stage 1, treating it as if it is an aggressive form of cancer with radiation and chemotherapy, as well as a constant intravenous supply of Formula 420A09T-T174B. Victims thus treated have a 73% recovery rate, but a 21% fatality rate. From Phase 2 onward, this protocol can slow the spread of SCP-420-2, but will not stop it entirely. In Stage 2, beginning 1 to 2 weeks after Stage 1, the subject's skin begins to show similar properties to those exhibited by hair and fingernails in Stage 1, becoming dry, brittle, and prone to cracking. As old skin flakes off, the subject's new skin begins to grow at an accelerated rate, eventually forming thick, leathery folds all over the subject's body. Skin flaps growing inside the mouth interfere with speech and eventually render subjects mute, but do not appear to impede breathing or eating. Indeed, subjects in Stage 2 exhibit a renewed interest in eating, possibly because the subject's body requires additional nutrients and calories to build the increasingly heavy armor of thickened, calloused skin. Stage 2 subjects will eat anything that they can get their hands on, and many die after attempting to eat poisonous or inedible objects. In Stage 3, beginning 3 to 6 weeks after Stage 2, nerves in the skin layer grow uncontrollably, but no longer connect to the victim's central nervous system. Genetic testing of the skin in this stage reveals that its DNA has become so mutated that it can no longer be classified as human. It is, in fact, a separate and very inhuman organism that almost acts as a parasite growing from the human host. The skin may develop tumor-like growths, which appear to be analogous to human muscle and secretory cells. Hair and fingernails sprout randomly from the mass of skin. By Stage 4, beginning 3 to 7 days after Stage 3, the skin has become a mass of thick, leathery folds, completely covering the human host to the point that they disappear completely. The skin begins to exhibit random twitching movements, as though it is indeed a living organism finally coming into its own as a life form and testing out its new body. The human subject within the skin continues to eat, although brain scans reveal that they are no longer in control of their mouth. Instead, the skin entity forces the mouth to move by moving the attached skin. Small holes begin to form in the skin, eventually growing into narrow tunnels or throats that lead back to the now trapped body of the helpless subject. The subject is still consumed with a ravenous hunger and will eat anything that they can get in their mouth. In Stage 5, beginning 1 to 2 days after Stage 4, the skin begins to move in patterns indicating rudimentary intelligence. The skin, although still attached to the original subject, is now completely and distinctly non-human. It is its own organism. It can move of its own accord, dragging the trapped host along for the ride, and it moves and feeds much in the manner of an extremely large amoeba. It feeds by excreting a digestive enzyme onto foodstuffs and then enveloping the nutrients with its skin folds, again like an amoeba surrounding its food. The food is taken into the throats. These tunnels connecting the outside of the skin to the now completely subsumed host are now directly connected to the host's circulatory system and function as additional mouths. They can consume nutrients which are moved down their length by bristly hairs and further broken down by grinding keratinous plates before being taken into the host's body. Most hosts will remain in Stage 5 indefinitely, although there still remains a much more dangerous Stage 6 yet to come. At this time, it's unknown what factor triggers SCP-420-2 to develop into Stage 6. Little information about Stage 6 is available at this time, although it is known that it involves even more accelerated skin and keratin growth, resulting in a sudden increase in size and mass. Perhaps the most terrifying part of the entire transformation is that the host remains alive for the duration of the process, and sometimes even after SCP-420-2 has settled comfortably into its new life at Stage 5. Mercifully, most hosts will have completely succumbed to insanity by this point, although some are shown by brain scans to still be self-aware and quite calm, perhaps fading into a Zen-like state as they accept the inevitability of their fate. SCP-420 is contained in a storage locker at an undisclosed site maintained by the Foundation, and it is only to be removed from this locker by SCP staff with Level 3 clearance or higher. It has been given the Safe class because, despite the horrifying nature of its effects, at least it doesn't move anywhere. Samples of SCP-420-1 not in use by testing should be stored in the container marked SCP-420-1 Decon in Locker 1014-420 until they lose potency, at which time they can be disposed of as biohazardous liquid waste. Victims infected with SCP-420-2 are not contagious and should be contained in standard solitary D-Class secure confinement. On reaching Phase 3, subjects should receive double rations. Due to the extreme danger of Phase 6, any subjects who reach Phase 4 should be closely monitored for signs that the condition may be advancing further, in which case they are to be immediately destroyed by incineration. Knowing the fate that befalls victims of SCP-420 should make anyone think twice about drinking out of a random bottle that you just found in the street, though personally, I think that's just common sense.
Hello everyone, Dr. Bob here. I know you're not used to seeing me here at the start of videos, but that's because today we have an extremely pressing matter to attend to, one that cuts to the deepest core of one of the SCP Foundation's deadliest contained anomalies, SCP-096, the Shy Guy. It's a creature that needs no introduction because it probably haunts all of your nightmares already. Close your eyes and picture it in your mind's eye, that gaunt face with the slack jaw and the lifeless white eyes. The face you hope never to see as long as you live. The pale skin pulled tight against bone, those impossibly long, gangly limbs. It sits there in its airtight containment cube, covering its face and quietly sobbing, always sobbing, as though cursing something beyond even its own understanding. Perhaps, when thinking about SCP-096, you feel a pang of sympathy mixed with the terror. After all, this anomaly is no sadist. Why would a sadist cry as it kills, like SCP-096 does? You're not alone in asking this question. I've spent many a night poring over classified files with an ever-freshening pot of coffee, trying to piece together the answers. SCP-096 is considered one of the most dangerous Euclid-class creatures in containment, and yet, so little about it is known, beyond its capability to do great harm whenever someone is unlucky enough to see its face and send it into its rage state. How did this happen? It's a question for the curious, like you or me, and after months of strenuous research, I believe I may have an answer. Whether you choose to believe it is up to you. Just be warned, when you hear what I believe to be the heartbreaking, tragic origin of this terrifying and pitiful monster, you may never be able to look at him the same way again. Not that looking at him should ever be high on your list of priorities. It begins in a tavern in a small Nepalese village a few miles away from the Chinese border, where Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain above sea level, waits. Its mere existence is like a challenge to the brave and foolhardy. "Conquer me," it seems to whisper. "Conquer me, and declare yourself above all those I have conquered."
become a god among men." It's always whispering like this, but few, in the grand scheme of things, can actually hear it. And sadly for him, the explorer is among those few. He's sitting in one of the tavern's many cozy nooks, picking away at a plate of mutton curry while sipping from a brass bowl of white chiang, a popular local drink. The explorer, living up to his name, has come a long way to get here. The rest of the village locals in the tavern eye him with a variety of knowing glances. They've seen so many like him before, smug smiles and puffed chests, thinking they'll be able to count themselves among the exalted few who've conquered the mountain to end all mountains. The bodies of many men like this are still frozen to the mountain's surface. One brave local, an older man who can speak English fluently, slides in across the table from the explorer. The old-timer tells him that whatever he thinks he'll find up on the mountain, honor, glory, recognition, he'd be better off searching for it elsewhere. Death awaits on the icy rocks above. The explorer, young, fit, and still feeling mighty smug, replies that death is there for the people who haven't worked hard enough, who haven't prepared. He's scaled other mountains before, all across the globe, from Scotland to Peru. Everest would hold no surprises for him, just a new, compelling challenge. The old man is, as you could probably imagine, unamused by the explorer's hubris. "All confidence and bluster now," he says with his thin, raspy voice. "But what will you say when you're face to face with the king?" The explorer, assuming that this king refers to the mountain itself, smiles and replies, "I'll ask him for his crown." With that, the old man leaves, content that he at least tried to dissuade the explorer from going on this doomed journey. If nothing else, his conscience would be clear now. He had done all that he possibly could. The explorer, not bothered by the grim prophecies of superstitious locals, finishes his curry and chiang and retires to the room he rented upstairs. He's so excited. Tomorrow, it will finally be time. All his months of training will pay off. He will climb to Mount Everest's peak. It would be an achievement to last a whole lifetime, one he would never ever forget, no matter how much he wants to. The next day, the tip of his ice axe cleaves into the mountainside as he grunts, strains, and pulls himself up another few feet. He's about 2,000 meters up, and every additional meter is fighting him. It's the bitterest cold he's ever known, a freeze so deep it makes his incredibly expensive thermal locking clothes feel like he's wearing wet, one-ply toilet paper. But the pain doesn't matter. The cold doesn't matter. He finds it exhilarating. Of course, just as the old man had warned, death could be waiting for him on this mountain, but the truth is, the explorer has never felt more alive. He winches himself up a few feet more, trying to regulate his breathing as his icy fingers, wrapped in thick gloves, struggle to find purchase on what feels like a sheer cliff face. There are many times when he's supporting his full body weight with only his hands. It often takes the kind of Herculean strength that only a lifetime of training can give you. After all, there's no room for error on Mount Everest. One wrong move, and you're either plummeting to your death or becoming a permanent frozen fixture of the mountainside. And because Everest is so dangerous, nobody comes to collect the bodies of dead mountaineering hopefuls. Their corpses, coated in often colorful winter jackets, litter the mountain. Some look at them as a tragic warning. Other, more morbid mountaineers use them as mile markers for their own more successful ascents. Whether the explorer would be lucky or become just another dead, frozen mile marker is still entirely up to chance. He climbs for a few more hours, pushing past his body's complaints, his physical limitations, until he reaches a well-earned plateau. Here, he establishes a small base camp and eats some of his rations. The area is thankfully guarded enough to keep out the worst of the sub-zero winds, so he can at least get some sleep without freezing to death. Mount Everest cannot be conquered today, and even someone with the explorer's bravado wouldn't dare to try. But as he settles down to sleep for the night, he can't help but look up, and the enormity of what stands before him he finds utterly terrifying. The mountain just keeps going and going and going, stretching up into the misty heavens, like the tip would only be a short jump from the moon. For the first time, the explorer begins to genuinely wonder, will I scale this mountain, or will I die on it? What he never even considers is that there may be a third option that's so much worse. Over the next few days, he keeps climbing further and further, Hundreds, then thousands of meters pass under him as he breaks past even the boundaries biology seemed to set for him. He's impossible to deter, an engine of pure, burning willpower, going because he knows he cannot stop. Because he knows that if he throws in the towel now, it will have all been for nothing. He'll be just another failure, one speck among billions. He'll have no meaning, no legacy. He'll just be another average Joe, forgotten. And that honestly scares him even more than the prospect of freezing to death up here. Eventually, even though it costs him almost everything to do it, he reaches 8,000 meters, an area known as the Death Zone, where it's believed to be impossible for humans to acclimate. This is the thin, rarefied air that few have been permitted to breathe, and he's seen so many brightly colored mile markers on the way to here. The ground is slippery, and the air chews into the explorer's skin, but he knows he's made it this far. Less than 1,000 meters from the peak now, he has almost conquered the mountain. So you can only imagine how surprised he feels when he sees another mountaineer walking down the side of the mountain towards him with an eerie kind of casualness. He's wearing standard mountain climbing gear, including white thermal pants and a hooded coat, zipped up to the chin. The explorer can't make out the stranger's face beyond the pair of thick, black goggles he's wearing over his eyes. What the hell is going on here? The second the stranger's eyes fall upon him, he feels a frightening sensation. The bite of the cold is gone. The chilling winds can't reach him. Instead, he feels warm, cozy, and content, like he's sitting in front of a warm fire in a well-insulated log cabin. In any other circumstance, these sensations might be welcomed, but a seasoned mountaineer knows that this is actually one of the worst things you can feel. It means that death is creeping in, and your body is opening the front door and welcoming it. And if this stranger is causing that feeling, then one thing is certain. He's bad news. The explorer wants to turn and run, but he finds that he can't. It's almost as though he's frozen in place, entranced by the warm, inviting feeling that the other mountaineer seems to exude as he gets closer and closer. That's when the explorer notices something strange about him. Something is glowing through his goggles, like hot embers, burning a bright, luminous orange. Are those eyes? Dear God, are those his eyes? The explorer can feel their terrible stare, literally feel it. It hurts to be looked at by this monster. Yes, that's what it is. A monster in the shape of a man. "Why are you here, mortal?" comes a booming voice from the inhuman mountaineer. "Do you wish to challenge me?" The explorer can't form words. He's quaking, his body acknowledging the cold that his mind can't as those two glowing eyes bore into him. "Speak," the stranger commands. "Who? What are you?" The explorer forces out between chattering teeth. The stranger laughs. "I am the king of the mountain." Though to the SCP Foundation, he's better known as SCP-1529, and he's the worst possible thing you can run into while trying to scale Mount Everest. The explorer remembers his conversation with the old man in the tavern, the question he asked, "What will you say when you're face to face with the king?" And his own foolish answer, "I'll ask him for his crown." Now, really, truly face to face with the king of the mountain, all the poor terrified explorer can do is whimper and beg for mercy. "Please," he says, the tears freezing on his cheeks as they fall. "I just wanted to climb." The king of the mountain gives another booming laugh, his eyes burning. "Then you will climb," he says, "and climb, and climb, and climb." The king of the mountain must have wielded truly unspeakable power to do what he does next. With a simple nod, the explorer is suddenly hanging off the mountainside, his fingers digging into the craggy rocks. The only thing supporting his weight. It was like being back at square one all over again, except with added pain, terror, and cold so deep he can feel his bones rattling. And all the while, he feels those eyes upon him, those burning, fiery eyes, staring with absolute malice. He keeps climbing. Every time he reaches a plateau, a place where he might camp and find even momentary comfort, the king of the mountain is already waiting there, staring that horrible stare. And just like that, the explorer was climbing again, wind whipping against him like 40 lashes from a cat o' nine tails. That, coupled with the endless strain of the climb on his muscles, is the worst agony he's ever felt. And yet, he never dies. Even though he hasn't eaten in days, weeks, months, years, he never, ever dies. He just fulfills the same torturous loop over and over again. It's like the King of the Mountain is just keeping him alive for his own amusement, a toy that's impossible to break. But while the explorer never breaks, as time goes on and the torments never cease, he does begin to change, like rock being molded by the tide. First, from the endless stress, his hair falls out. His skin goes pale from the lack of sun. His body becomes thin and wiry from starvation and malnourishment. The endless physical strain even warps his limbs. His arms and legs begin to stretch, his body becoming elongated and grotesque. All the way through this horrific, dehumanizing ordeal, the King of the Mountain stares at him. One day, the explorer, now changed, reaches a plateau, and as can be expected, the King of the Mountain stares at him with his burning eyes. The explorer cowers and covers his face with his hands, sobbing from exhaustion. He just wants the King of the Mountain to look away, to leave him be. He babbles incoherently. He doesn't want to be seen anymore. His pain simply makes the King of the Mountain laugh. "I gave you your wish," the Mountain King says, his voice oozing with contempt. "You climbed, didn't you? You thought that your climbing would elevate you, make you more than human. But now, you're so much less. Our business concludes here. I'm tired of playing with you." And with that, the king is gone. The explorer is alone, stranded among the snow and the whipping winds of the death zone, but very much alive. He's finally able to go. At long last, after what felt like an eternity, he's escaped. When the explorer arrives in the village again, he's not the explorer at all. It's been years since he went missing on the mountain. The old man who had warned him not to go up onto Mount Everest had passed peacefully in the interim. The other members of his small village would not be afforded the same luxury. Instead, the explorer stumbled back through the village limits, still covering his face. The only sounds he can hear are the wailing wind and his own pitiful sobbing. Everything hurts. He's so terribly afraid. He needs somebody to help him. Why will nobody help him? The sun begins to rise, and the village shakes itself awake. People leave their homes to go about their daily tasks. None of them are expecting to see a monster loping through their streets, a pale, gangling monstrosity, stretched and hairless. It engenders a mix of fear and curiosity as it stumbles around, audibly sobbing with a loud, warped voice. It's like nothing any of them have ever seen before, like something out of a myth or a folk tale. But for the monster that was once the explorer, it's so much worse. At first, he thinks that the villagers might be there to help him, but then he sees their eyes, that same intense, burning fire pit orange as the King of the Mountain, that same horrible gaze that the explorer thought he'd escaped when he'd left the mountain, the gaze that meant pain, torment, and madness. Even when he tries to cover his face, when he wails at them to go away in words that make sense to no one but him, he can still feel those terrible eyes on him. Is he still on the mountain? Is he still at the mercy of the Mountain King? Are these all just illusions or projections, another awful trick? What did he ever do to deserve this kind of torment? Was the crime of wanting to climb a damn mountain worth this kind of everlasting suffering? Did it earn him the gaze of all these monstrous eyes? The explorer begins to feel his anguish being replaced by another feeling, rapidly rising rage, the kind of pure, blistering hatred that inexorably leads to one result: violence. First, he screams, then they scream, and finally, the killing begins. The creature that had once been the explorer leaves no stone unturned. Even when they try to run away, he still feels their eyes on him. He needs to kill them all, to annihilate them quickly, leave no trace. It's the only way he can feel anything close to at peace again. It becomes a kind of terrible chain reaction. The sound of the horrors going on in the street only entices more to come outside and see what's going on, to look at the creature causing all this carnage, to see its face. They have no idea that this very action is dooming them. And within the hour, the village is empty, save for one creature, the creature that had once been the explorer, now just afraid, confused, and alone. He will always be alone. The anomaly that will soon be known as SCP-096 simply bows its head and weeps. The year is 1630, and the city of London is bustling with new life. The streets are filled with people going about their daily lives, cramming into housing and businesses, and struggling to accommodate the rapidly increasing population, which has more than doubled in the previous 50 years. Among the new citizens of London is a dark figure who keeps to himself, a man in long black robes and a beaked mask, dressed like the plague doctors of the Black Death centuries before. The figure that will one day be known as SCP-049 has come to London town to embark on the next chapter of his life in his ongoing quest to solve the ills plaguing humanity. Though one might expect his appearance to make him stand out, most of the citizens surging through the city streets have far more important things on their minds than what the man in the mask might be up to. So he has managed to carve out a little sanctuary, an empty warehouse where he rests and works. When curiosity gets the better of him, he slinks down alleyways, avoiding crowds and listening for any whispered secrets he can catch from the shadows. It is on one of these outings that he hears tell of Henry Percy, also known as the Wizard Earl, a mysterious researcher of science and the occult held in Martin Tower in the Tower of London. A man of wisdom and curiosity, pushing the boundaries of scientific study. That is just the sort of man that the Doctor has been hoping to meet and learn from here in this great city. The Plague Doctor swiftly abandons his sanctuary and makes his way to the Tower of London, where he makes swift work of the guards that would bar him from entry. He does not enjoy harming innocents, but alas, some sacrifices must be made in the pursuit of greater knowledge and understanding. Leaving a trail of bodies in his wake, the Plague Doctor makes his way into Martin Tower.
Excuse me, sir. I apologize for the intrusion, but as a fellow academic, I wondered if I might speak with you.
But as he enters the chamber, the Doctor finds that his polite introduction was wasted on an empty room. Wherever this Wizard Earl might be, he is not in his designated quarters. Fearing the worst, the Doctor searches for signs of a struggle, for bloodstains on the floor or overturned furniture, but everything appears to be in its rightful place. Where, then, could Henry Percy have gone? The Plague Doctor explores every inch of the tower, searching for any clues that might point him in the direction of the missing man. He inspects every item on every surface, pulls every book from every shelf, but as he pulls one particular book from its spot, the bookshelf appears to pop loose from the wall like a door opening. Indeed, it is a door, revealing a dark, winding stairway just beyond its secret opening.
Ah, so this is where you have disappeared to.
Truly, this Earl must be a clever man, a good ally to have in the battle against the pestilence. He follows the stairs down, down into a small room in the bowels of the tower. It is a sparse, barren room, with only a stack of journals and a large iron door. The Doctor spends hours searching for a lock or other mechanism to open the door, before turning to the journals left behind by the tower's occupant. There, he discovers the instructions for unlocking the iron gateway, directions he recognizes from his time studying alchemy. Fortunately, he has all of the necessary materials tucked away in his trusty doctor's bag, and he is able to effectively perform the esoteric procedure. As he dusts off his gloved hands, content with a job well done, he hears the click of a bolt unlatching, and the second secret door he has discovered today swings open to welcome him in. Ever the adventurous spirit, the Doctor picks up his bag and crosses the threshold into whatever awaits him on the other side. As the iron door shuts behind him, the Doctor gazes up into a yellow sky dotted with an infinite number of black stars. A breeze blows the scent of dried flowers, mold, and the dusty pages of century-old books into his nostrils. He hears the sound of waves lapping at a shore and turns to take in the sight of a thick black sea washing up onto a stark white shore. The world around him is an array of black, white, yellow, and red, the yellow sky reflecting in the inky waves, the glittering black stars dancing above garish red buildings, white staircases, yellow doors, and black windows made from something like stained glass. This strange new place is not empty either. All around him, there are as many people bustling through the streets as there are back in London, though their attire is quite different. These people dress in a way that feels familiar, that reminds the Plague Doctor of the ornate clothing he once saw at the Carnival of Venice. The people cover their faces too, commedia dell'arte masks hiding their features and giving them a mysterious appearance. For the first time since the days of the Black Plague, the Doctor is keenly aware of the fact that he does not stand out in this place. In fact, he blends right in. Now to search for Henry Percy, or anyone else who can offer the Doctor some helpful insight. Uncertain of where exactly to start, the Doctor decides to simply strike up a conversation with a stranger. A woman walks by in an elaborate red gown, her feathery white mask almost resembling a swan.
Excuse me, madame,
the doctor calls to her, stepping into her path.
No time to talk, I'm already quite late.
She brushes past him, and the doctor braces for the ill effect of physical contact between the two to take hold. However, she continues on her merry way, seemingly unaffected by his normally deadly touch. He watches her go, stunned into silence for a moment. The citizens of this strange new place. It is safe for him to touch them. Something else catches his eye about the woman too. Up close, it seemed to him that her mask was not a costume piece, but in fact, a part of her face, much like his mask was a part of his own.
How curious,
he remarks aloud to himself. Henry Percy can wait. This is a far more compelling matter.
I must uncover more about this land.
And so the plague doctor takes a long stroll through the unusual city, noticing as he goes that the geometry and gravity of this place do not play by the rules he recognizes. Buildings slant at odd angles, alleyways and corridors appear and disappear as the layout of the city seems to shift at random with each glance. The people themselves are just as bizarre as the place they occupy, behaving either uniquely rudely or entirely too familiar. Pushing past the doctor with a glare or tugging at his robes insistently, attempting to pull him down an alleyway or into a rapturous bout of sudden fevered dancing in a town square. He refuses these advances as politely as possible and carries on his way. An elegantly dressed couple gives him a friendly wave as they walk by him, not an unusual occurrence. What is unusual is where they are waving from, looking down on him from an upside-down staircase that they traverse with no trouble. Some other gravity source holding them in this reversed position as they disappear into a dizzyingly constructed building.
Fascinating.
The doctor shakes his head in awe. Then it occurs to him. He should be taking notes on all of this. He opens his bag and digs around for his leather-bound notebook, but can't seem to find it. He stops on the street and begins dumping out the contents of his pack onto the stone walkway. Jars of specimens, salves, syringes, and surgical tools all tumble out, but no notebook. It must have fallen out of his bag somewhere on his journey. Or worse, it could have been stolen by one of these flamboyantly dressed strangers. No, he mustn't allow his mind to jump to the worst possible explanation. Most likely he simply dropped it somewhere, and he only needs to retrace his steps to find it. He begins to walk back the way he came, as best he can find it in city streets that seem to warp and change with every moment like the landscape of a dream. He approaches dozens of people, but each stranger he speaks to brushes him aside, rushing off to their far more important business. They seem to look at him with disdain, like something foul stuck to the bottom of their fine shoes. It is discouraging, and it seems as if the notebook may very well be lost forever. But then, hope. Amidst a sea of people hurrying to their next destination, the doctor spots a man in a red cloak standing notably still, leaning against a nearby wall. The figure looks up at him, eyes shining behind a red mask in the shape of a happy, smiling face, reminiscent of the figure of Il Capitano from Commedia dell'arte performances the doctor dimly recalls. He sheepishly approaches the grand figure in the cloak and red mask, explaining that he is an outsider to this place. When the red-masked man speaks, he speaks in a warm voice, but with a distinct air of authority.
Welcome to Alagada, sir, for that is the name of this kingdom. You are fortunate, very fortunate indeed, for I am the Red Lord of Alagada, wearer of the mirthful mask, a chief advisor to the king.
Being a man with medieval origins, the plague doctor bows deferentially the second he hears that he's in the presence of a lord. With his knees on the ancient cobblestones below, he begs the Red Lord for assistance in finding his precious notebook, the bearer of all his research and valuable scientific secret. The Red Lord pushes himself away from the wall, standing at an impressive height, seemingly suddenly far larger than he had at first glance. His face seems to strike a sympathetic tone, as sympathetic as one can be while wearing a mask. With a grandiose hand gesture and a dramatic stride, he asks the doctor to follow him and begins strutting off down the alleyway. The doctor has come across a person with good manners in this confounding place. He follows close behind the Red Lord as the two traverse the unstable landscape, following a yellow cobblestone street to a winding black staircase that curls around and around in a seemingly eternal spiral before tilting dizzyingly on its side. The doctor hesitates, afraid he will lose his footing, but much to his surprise, the laws of gravity seem to shift along with the angle of the stairs. It feels as if he is still walking along the same even plane as before, though he can see the sights below now jutting out of view at a disconcerting right angle that makes his vision swim and his stomach turn. So he turns his gaze onto his companion's back, matching the Lord's every confident step. He wonders idly where the man is taking him, but decides to hold off on additional questions until they have reached their destination. The Red Lord comes to a stop at the top of a tall, thin tower. He stands before an unusually shiny black door that curls down at the edges, like the entryway itself is frowning. He sweeps his arm in the direction of the door and beckons the Plague Doctor to follow him inside. Before the Plague Doctor can even mention that the door has no handle or knocker, it simply opens of its own accord, as if by magic. He shakes his head. The Red Lord has already vanished inside, and he quickly follows him. The color palette of Alagada is already quite limited, but this room is stripped of the scant bits of bright pigment found outside. Not a scrap of red or yellow can be seen here, save for the suddenly garish garb of the Red Lord himself. The chamber is decorated in black and white, shimmering black velvet and cold, cruel white marble or something like marble, as this material has an eerie, icy sheen that almost hurts to look at. In a large black chair that again curls down at the edges in a melancholy fashion, there sits another masked man. He is clad in black robes, and his pale white face bears the face of tragedy, open mouth curved into a permanent frown of anguish. The Red Lord gestures to the figure in the chair, who does not speak, and introduces him as the mighty Black Lord of Alagada. The Plague Doctor can see the Black Lord's eyes following him from within the holes of the mask. A mask that members of the SCP Foundation would later refer to as SCP-035. The Doctor asks whether the Black Lord can help him find his book, puzzled at this whole situation. The Red Lord throws his head back and begins to laugh, a warm and genuine sound that nonetheless sends a shiver down the Doctor's spine. The Red Lord claps a hand on the Doctor's shoulder, giving it a squeeze that feels encouraging and threatening all at once, explaining that he'd been brought here under false pretenses. The Lord's already had the book. The Black Lord just needs a favor before he can have it back.
Thank you for accepting my invitation.
The Black Lord speaks, his voice hissing out from the scowling mouth of his mask. The Plague Doctor protests, demanding his book, furious at the deception.
Oh, you'll get them back,
The Red Lord laughs again.
The Black Lord will return them if you prove yourself worthy of their ownership. I bid you farewell, Doctor. May your stay in Alagada be pleasant.
The Red Lord sweeps out of the room, leaving the Doctor alone with the Black Lord. Silence hangs heavy between the two, before the Doctor asks the Black Lord why he'd even want a physician from another world to attend to him. The Black Lord wheezes and spits up black slime that corrodes the ground beneath him. The Doctor shakes his head.
I am no miracle worker, only a simple doctor. I struggle to treat the ailments of my own world. I do not wish to disappoint you, but I have failed again and again to cure the pestilence that plagues my home. I do not know if I would have the capacity to cure you.
The Black Lord's frown seems to deepen.
I am very sorry to hear that. Perhaps I should keep your notes for myself then, and give them to an Alagadan physician for research.
The Doctor's composure breaks. He stomps about the chamber, flinging open every door he can find, searching desperately for the work he'd spent his extremely long life painstakingly compiling, the work that represented his sole efforts in the medical field. He stops at a padlocked door on the far side of the room, grabbing hold of its lock. The Black Lord suddenly cries for him to stop, but it is too late. The Plague Doctor has wrenched the lock free from the door. As soon as the Doctor lets the lock clatter to the ground, there is a horrid skittering sound, like the legs of a massive metal spider crawling along a wall. Click, click, click. And then, all at once, the formerly padlocked door is thrown open with such force it nearly rips from its hinges. A creature crawls through the opening, a monster with the body of a shiny yellow spider, a smooth white humanoid torso, 2 long clawed arms, and a round, featureless orb of a face. It lashes out blindly, raking its claws at the Black Lord where he sits on his chair. Then, before the Plague Doctor can even try to apprehend it, the monster rips through the main door of the chamber, climbing out and over the edge of the tower, and down to the city below. The Black Lord shouts for the Plague Doctor to help him.
What about the monster? What will become of it?
The Plague Doctor's mind races, trying to wrap around what he just witnessed. But the Black Lord has no interest in the monster. The city guards will take care of that. He needs help with his own injuries. The Lord groans in pain, a thick black substance leaking from his wounds and spreading across the once pristine white floor. The Black Lord implores the Plague Doctor to treat him. The Plague Doctor remembers his duty to all that suffer from illness and injury, an oath he once took a long, long time ago, and he opens his doctor's bag, ready to get to work. He has no grasp of Alagadan physiology, no idea where to begin in terms of performing any procedure on the Black Lord, but he cannot stand idly by and watch this man suffer. He begins pulling instruments from his bag, vials of phosphorescent elixirs and foul-smelling tinctures, and begins to improvise. He cleans the wounds with gauze dipped in one of his many tinctures, then begins treating them. The Black Lord's shallow breathing slows to deeper, calmer breaths as the medicine begins to do its job, and these positive results spur the doctor to work faster. He seals up each of the wounds, then slathers them all in a glowing green salve to prevent infection, if infection even exists in this world. When the work is finished, the Black Lord sits up, seemingly to be completely recovered, except for the visible stitches and the tearing of his robes.
Thank you, Doctor. I stole from you, and yet you helped me anyway. Allow me to return this to you, along with my sincerest gratitude.
He reaches into the depths of his robes and produces the doctor's leather-bound notebook.
Take it.
The doctor snatches the notebook from the Black Lord's grip and returns it to its rightful place inside of his bag.
Villain,
He mutters to himself as he does.
Our ways may seem strange to you,
The Black Lord says.
but these are troubled times in Alagada. All is not well in the court of the Hanged King. There is deception and betrayal everywhere.
All kingdoms encounter periods of strife.
The Plague Doctor remarks.
If you will excuse me, now that I have treated you, I will be on my way back to my own land. I do not wish to stay here any longer.
Of course.
The Black Lord waves him toward the door. As the doctor prepares to leave, however, the Black Lord speaks again.
Are you quite sure that is your land, Doctor? You look quite like the child of a woman I once knew, long ago, who made the mistake of defying the king. She had the face of a crow, as you do. A mask that was not a mask.
Excuse me?
The Plague Doctor does not understand.
Were you born in your world? Were you a child there? Do you remember it that way?
The Black Lord asks. The doctor thinks for a long moment. He cannot recall ever being anything other than what he is now, a doctor with a singular purpose.
I do not know. Perhaps, dear Doctor, this is not your first time in the land of Alagada, and I imagine that, with time, you shall walk its twisted alleys once again. Consider that on your journey back to the place you call home.
The Black Lord laughs, a low, hollow sound.
Farewell.
Eager to be rid of this place with its lies, tricks, and monsters of many shapes, the Plague Doctor takes his leave. This journey he hoped would provide some answers, but instead, all he found were more questions than he ever could have anticipated. A young man steps off the subway into the station. Like many others on their daily commute, he has headphones on and keeps his eyes glued to his phone as he messages his friends, plays mobile games, and watches videos. He takes the escalator up and out of the subway station, paying no mind to the rats that scurry past down the handrail. He steps out onto the street, head still never looking up from his phone. He's made the same trip hundreds, if not thousands of times, each step of his route home so burned into his mind that he could make this journey blindfolded. He turns a corner when, suddenly, he looks up. There's something different. In the split second before everything goes wrong, he realizes what it is. The grate he has stepped onto has just given way. The young man screams as he falls through the loose drainage grate in the sidewalk and is swallowed up into the bowels of the city. He is in the air for only moments before landing with a thud in the darkness below. The air is knocked out of him, but he's immediately aware that he didn't hit the ground as hard as he could have. Something must have broken his fall. It's too dark to see anything, though. He feels around for his phone. It must be around here somewhere. There, he's got it. The screen is cracked, but luckily, it still works. He turns on the flashlight and looks around. He appears to be in some kind of maintenance area below the sidewalk. The room is mostly empty. So what did he land on? He sits up and looks beneath him to find rats. A huge pile of rats. The young man screams and hops up as the rats squeak and scatter. He's in a panic, looking for a way to get out of here as quickly as possible, when he spots something else. There's a pile of dirty clothes in the corner of the room, or at least, he hopes it's a pile of dirty clothes. He slowly steps towards whatever it is. Even after his own harrowing ordeal, he still feels compelled to check it out. If he just found a body, the police will need to know, and he might even get his name in the paper. He can see the headline now. Local man finds missing heiress after heroically plunging into city's depths, inherits her millions for some reason. As he steps closer, he notices a cloud of gnats and flies buzzing around the pile. He slaps at his neck, killing some kind of biting fly. He's standing right next to the pile, but he still can't tell if this is a person or not. "Hello? Are you okay?" the young man asks. No response. He nudges the pile with his foot and jumps back. Did he feel something move? He sticks out his foot and nudges it again. The pile definitely moves this time. A man rolls over, his face covered in bug bites. He's moaning and reaching out, unable to see from his blind eyes that look like they have been gnawed out by rats. He opens his mouth and with one last gasp, appears to die right in front of the young man. The young man can only watch, frozen in fear, as a rat wriggles its way out of his open mouth and stares at the young man. The young man screams, turns, and runs. He doesn't know where he's going as he runs through the dark tunnels, but he finds a set of stairs and follows them up before bursting out of a door into the open air. He slams the door behind him. He's sure the man he saw in the tunnels died, but he's not taking any chances. He runs the rest of the way home, taking the stairs up to his apartment 2 at a time. He gets into his home and locks and bolts the door behind him. He leans against the door and tries to catch his breath, letting himself slide down to the floor. Finally, safe at last. He slaps at his neck again. Another fly. It must have been in his coat. He takes off his jacket and shirt, shaking them out, and is surprised to see more flies come out, but also other bugs like worms and cockroaches. He keeps shaking, panicking now, as more and more bugs fall from his clothes. He can see in the mirror on the wall that his body is covered in bites, but that's not what really has his attention. He gets close to the mirror, almost in a daze. This can't be right. He must be hallucinating. He looks in the mirror, reaches into his nose, and pulls out a cockroach. Flies crawl out of his mouth as he opens his mouth to scream, while behind him, rats start squeezing in under his door and crawling up his body, until he is completely covered in a living, writhing mass of vermin. Many of the anomalies studied by the SCP Foundation are cruel, horrific, and utterly mysterious. And this is one of the rare cases that embodies all three. Because this is SCP-027, also known as the Vermin God. SCP-027 is a phenomenon with strange and frightening properties that seems to affect one human subject at a time. When someone becomes a host to this anomaly, they will find that they are constantly surrounded by swarms of various types of vermin, parasites, and other pests. The human host has no ability to control or command these creatures, and in fact, the animals will often show aggression towards the host, biting and scratching at them as well as any other person who comes near. It is unknown what causes this effect, but once someone has become a host to SCP-027, the effect appears to be permanent. The swarms of vermin that follow the host do not appear instantly, and instead tend to follow the same pattern of showing up in waves. First, swarms of flying insects, including gnats and flies, will begin to form a cloud around the unlucky individual. Next, non-flying creatures such as lice, cockroaches, worms, spiders, and rats will begin to crawl on the host. The more time that passes, the more of all of these that will appear. Should the host try to leave the location, some of the pests will attempt to cling to them or follow behind, but many of the others will disperse. As soon as the host stops again, though, the process will repeat, and they will once again soon be surrounded by bugs and rodents. While there is no way for a host to rid themselves of the SCP-027 anomaly, the phenomenon has been known to be transferred to a new host, but only following the death of the first. It appears that 027 will continue to jump from host to host, and has likely done this many times in the past. Preliminary research into just how long SCP-027 has existed is ongoing, but early signs point to it having existed for potentially hundreds of years. SCP-027 was first identified by the Foundation when, in the 1990s, a male in his late 30s was found in an abandoned warehouse that was completely overrun with rats and insects. The man was filthy, malnourished, and covered in bites and scratches from a variety of pests. He also showed symptoms of deteriorating mental health, likely caused by a combination of heavy substance abuse and sleep deprivation, neither of which were unexpected, given his horrendous circumstances. The anomalous properties of the subject were quickly recognized by field agents, and he was brought to an SCP Foundation site, where he unfortunately died while still under observation. An autopsy later revealed that over 70% of the man's body at the time of death consisted of a colony of rats that had nested in his abdomen and had been living there long enough to produce at least several generations of offspring. Around 6 days after the man's death, A Foundation security officer at the site where the man had been held reported to medical staff that he was experiencing breathing issues. He told them they began after he had been woken up by what he thought was a housefly crawling up his nose, and he did remember the fly coming back out. Later investigations would reveal that this statement was true, and that the fly laid a clutch of eggs in his sinus cavity as well. The security officer was placed under observation, and following the appearance of more types of vermin, he was classified as SCP-02702. The man who died was then reclassified as SCP-02701, and SCP-027 was redefined as an anomalous effect rather than one individual. It is still unknown just how SCP-027 attracts animals, or why it chooses the ones it does to summon to its location. Neither SCP-02701 or 02 have expressed any communication with any kind of entity or the feeling that one was present, and were unable to provide any additional information on the mysterious qualities of the anomaly. In an interview that took place not long after the security officer was identified as a host and placed into containment, he only described feeling dirty and itchy, like he needed a shower. He was deeply frightened by what was happening and expressed the desire to rid himself of the anomalous effect as soon as possible so that he could rejoin his family. Research into the anomaly continues, but analysis of the current host has been inconclusive at best. The lack of understanding about just what SCP-027 is, how its anomalous effect functions, and how it jumps to a new host has led the SCP Foundation to classify it as Euclid. The current host for the anomaly is being held in a 5x5 meter cell with a raised grated floor that is connected to a strong vacuum system to trap any vermin that appear. Any creatures that are removed from the cell are to be incinerated, except for a small portion which are sent to research teams for analysis, though so far, all animals have appeared to be completely non-anomalous in nature. SCP-02702 is to be monitored by at least 2 Foundation personnel at all times, and in the event that the subject exhibits any odd behavior or an unexpected species of animal is discovered in the cell, it is to be reported to a Level 4 personnel immediately. Security personnel assigned to 027 duty are to be vaccinated against all possible animal-borne diseases and have permission to subdue the subject with tranquilizers should the need arise. Should the subject appear to be experiencing a serious medical event, all high-value personnel should be moved far away from the current host to lower the chance of them becoming a host to the anomaly. And no personnel of Level 4 clearance or higher should approach within 200 meters of the subject at all until SCP-027 and its strange properties are better understood.
The group of children on their bikes stare intently at the large, abandoned house. Rumors have been circulating all school year about a monster that lives inside. One child tells the others about the kid from a couple towns over who went inside and never came back out, and it's easy to believe that something evil could be lurking inside the run-down home with its peeling paint and many broken windows. The children begin teasing each other, daring one another to go in and see the monster for themselves. No one seems especially eager to volunteer, though, as they all egg each other on. As the group of children joke about who should be forced to go inside, another comes riding up behind them, struggling to catch his breath. "You left me behind again," he complains. Clearly, this is not the first time that this smallest child of the group has been made to try and keep up with his bigger and faster friends. The bigger kids all turn to look at him. They don't need to discuss it any further. The answer to who must go inside has already been decided. The smaller child tries to protest, but ultimately, what decision does he have but to go inside? He can't let everyone else think that he's a chicken. He's got to prove once and for all that he's just as tough as any of them. Without another word, he lets his bike fall into the dirt and makes his way towards the big, creepy house. The door pushes open without any resistance, and the boy looks into the dark house. The boy steps inside, and the floorboards creak loudly under his feet. The inside looks much like the outside, old, worn, and abandoned. But then, he hears something, a scratching noise coming from above him. He turns to leave, but he can see all of his friends through the doorway, and they motion for him to keep going. The boy steels his nerves and turns back. He's going to show them just how brave he is. The boy starts up the stairs, each one groaning as he steps onto it. He reaches the top of the stairs to find a landing with more rooms, each full of dirt and debris. There's spray paint on many of the walls and lots of trash. It looks like teens may use this as a place to hang out. But there at the other side of the landing is one more room, and the door is shut. From outside, the group of children can see through the upper windows as the boy makes his way through the house. They're not laughing and teasing any longer. In fact, they're impressed by how bravely he is exploring the old home. Though none of them would admit it out loud,
He's earning their respect. The boy reaches the shut door at the end of the hall and presses his ear to it, but he doesn't hear anything inside. He places his hand on the doorknob and slowly opens it. The boy screams and falls backwards as the cat that was hiding inside panics and jumps through one of the open windows. The boy can't help but laugh. Of course it was just a... The boy screams again as the floor gives way beneath him and he crashes down onto the first floor in a pile of debris. He's stunned by the fall before starting to scream again as that floor gives way too. His yelling is silenced by the air being knocked out of him as he hits the basement floor. He's covered in dust and pieces of 2 floors he fell through. He feels bruised and sore, but he can wiggle his fingers and toes. He's not paralyzed, and it doesn't even feel like he's broken a bone. Maybe he's okay. But no, he's definitely not okay. Because suddenly, there's something picking him up off the floor. As his eyes adjust to the dark basement, he sees what it is that's holding him. It's half man, half machine, a huge, disgusting mix of metal and flesh. The boy is too scared to scream anymore as the creature's unmoving, dead-looking eyes stare straight into his. Its face looks as though the skin has been stretched across a human metallic skull. The boy can only watch as the monster raises its sharp, metallic fingers and brushes the dirt out of the boy's hair. The boy starts to whimper, but whatever this thing is, it doesn't seem to want to hurt him. A tinny, robotic voice coming from a small device on the creature's face suddenly breaks the silence. Al anta ala mayuram. The boy doesn't understand, but the robotic man tilts his horrific head to the side and repeats the same thing. The boy is still confused, but he feels like the robot is trying to tell him something. He somehow gets the sense that it's not going to hurt him. Is this the monster that everyone has been afraid of? A misunderstood machine man living down here in the basement? The robot flinches as something is smashed on the back of his head. He tosses the boy to the side and turns to see the boy's friends, each of them armed with pieces of wood and other scraps as weapons. They've come here to save their friend from the monster that they dared him to find. Another runs up to strike the robot, but before he can reach him, he falls to his knees in pain, as do the rest of the children. The creature has begun emitting a high-frequency noise, and the children try to cover their ears. They all feel a searing pain that makes it feel as though their heads will explode. The piercing noise continues to ring out, but the monster looks like it has entered some kind of dormant state and is no longer moving. The small boy is able to slowly get back to his knees, hands still clasped to the side of his head, and stand up. He runs past the monster and his friends who are writhing on the floor in pain, up the stairs and out of the old house. A woman stands at a kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for their dinner that evening, and talking to her oldest daughter about her plans for that weekend, when the back door suddenly bursts open. Standing there is her son, the small boy. He's barely able to whisper the words, "Monster. There's a monster in the basement," before he collapses, blood pouring from his ears and nose, before he begins convulsing on the floor. At the local police station, an officer is speaking on the phone. "I see. Yes, that is quite strange. A metal man? You don't say. I'll send someone out there right away. Don't go anywhere." The police officer hangs up the phone and looks around, making sure no one is nearby or listening to him, and then takes out a cell phone. He dials a number from memory, and someone answers on the other end almost immediately. "Yes, this is Field Agent Patch," the police officer says. "You need to get a containment team out here right away, and a good one too. I don't know what it is, but it's dangerous." An SCP Foundation mobile task force that specializes in containing dangerous humanoid threats soon arrived at the house and took the anomaly into captivity. Misinformation teams concocted a cover story about a gas leak leading to the unfortunate deaths of several of the town's children and administering amnestics to any potential witnesses. Once the messy business of containment was over, though, it was time to figure out just what this strange creature was. SCP-203 appears to have at one time been a Caucasian human male, though its appearance now is far different than it once was. This bipedal humanoid creature stands 2.5 meters tall and weighs roughly 200 kilograms. Both its incredible height and weight are due to the fact that the man's original skeleton has been entirely removed and replaced with a mechanical framework made of cast iron. The metal skeleton is much larger than the original bones, and in many places SCP-203's skin has split from being stretched over it, revealing the mechanical structure underneath. Other parts of the framework appear to have been intentionally made to protrude through the skin, though it is unclear for what purpose. In addition to this larger-than-normal mechanical skeleton, a number of other augmentations are present on SCP-203. Its fingers have been extended into sharpened, hook-like barbs that are approximately 1 meter long. Its lips have been removed entirely, making it clear that there is no movable jawbone, and that the skull is likely one large hollow piece of metal, and there are several more hook-like protrusions jutting out around the mouth area, smaller but similar in appearance to the fingers. SCP-203's legs have been modified as well, with 2 added joints that give them an appearance more akin to a dog's, and its toes have been removed and replaced with a solid piece of metal similar to those found in steel-toed boots. Its chest has no sternum or breastplate, which causes the skin stretched across to pull inward as its diaphragm contracts. Its ears have also been removed, though it still seems to possess hearing that is far beyond that of an average human. And while its eyes still remain, they are held in a permanently forward-facing position by several needles that emerge from the eye sockets. The irises also appear permanently dilated and do not react to light. In place of a mouth is a small speaker covered by a metal grate that is capable of producing basic vocalizations, though with a distinctly robotic sound to them. Tests have shown that SCP-203 has a basic understanding of English, but its own primary language seems to be a type of Arabic, though there are no records of the exact dialect. SCP-203 does not need to eat or drink, and without any visible mouth, it is likely incapable of either. Instead, it runs off of a power cell located within its body that will provide energy for up to 72 hours. After those 3 days, SCP-203 will shut down and enter a hibernation state for 3 to 4 hours, during which its power source will recharge, providing it with another 72 hours of energy. All attempts to examine SCP-203 by either X-ray, CT, ultrasound, and other forms of diagnostic imagery have failed, and attempts at exploratory surgery have triggered its defense mechanisms, which are both painful and deadly. When it perceives that it is being threatened in some way, SCP-203 is capable of emitting a high-frequency droning sound that has a profoundly damaging effect on the human nervous system. The effects of this defense mechanism were able to be observed directly when a D-Class personnel accidentally struck SCP-203 and its droning sound was activated. Immediately after being exposed to the sound, D-104 experienced a severe headache. After 15 minutes, the headache grew worse, and D-104 began to bleed from the ears. After a half hour, the D-Class, who had now gone to the infirmary, began to experience seizures and was bleeding from all of his orifices. 10 minutes later, the D-Class was dead. Another test was performed, and the results were nearly identical, with symptoms progressing at roughly the same rate. However, this time, rather than move the D-Class to the infirmary, it was kept in the cell with SCP-203. After 40 minutes, the D-Class was dead, and a few minutes later, 203 finally ceased its droning sound. SCP-203 then approached the body of the deceased D-Class and began to use its own augmentations to start removing the skeleton of the D-Class. While SCP-203 was stopped before it could complete its task, it now appears that the droning sound it produces is a defense mechanism, but may also be a part of the process by which it creates new instances of SCP-203. In interviews with SCP-203, it claims to have no memories of its life prior to its augmentation. It says that it now exists in a near-constant state of pain and confusion, and that the times when its battery is expended and it enters a rest state are its only escape from the pain of its existence. It also claims that it has no memory of what happens once its defense mechanism is activated, nor does it remember what it did to the body of the D-Class that was left in its cell. However, it is unknown just how truthful SCP-203 is being. There has been no way to verify anything that SCP-203 tells researchers, and for the time being, its statements are to be regarded by Foundation staff as an attempt to elicit sympathy or otherwise manipulate them emotionally. It's made several requests for pain-killing medication and anesthetics, but so far, all of these requests have been denied. SCP-203 has been classified as Euclid, and it is kept in a specialized storage bunker at a research site. 2 D-Class personnel equipped with sound filtering equipment guard it at all times, and it is accompanied by an armed escort to any testing or research sessions. Is SCP-203 the ultimate victim? A normal human that was transformed against his will into a crude amalgamation of man and machine? Maybe there is something more to SCP-203, or rather, less. Is SCP-203 fooling all of us? Is this tortured iron soul nothing more than a metallic monster disguising itself with the skin of its last victim? Perhaps with more research, we will one day know the answer.
A prisoner in a striped uniform is led down the central corridor of a penitentiary by a pair of guards. Wherever he's being taken, the prisoner is not going peacefully. The other inmates stand at their cell doors watching as he is dragged past them. The prisoner is begging for the guards to show him mercy, pleading for them not to make him go in there.
to subject him to anything in the world, but that. The guards pay no attention to his cries as they force him along. They reach the end of the corridor and stop in front of the last cell, number 667. The prisoner looks into the dark, empty cell and screams, struggling against his captors one last time before they overpower him and shove him inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The prisoner looks around the small, dim cell. All that's inside is a bed with a thin mattress and a filthy toilet. He looks extremely scared, his eyes searching around the cell as if a monster is going to leap out from a dark corner and grab him. The prisoner hears a cracking sound and jumps in fright, spinning around to see a different kind of monster. Standing between the two guards who led him here is a third prison guard. He's enormous, and the prisoner watches as he cracks the knuckles of his massive hands. The giant guard reaches for something hanging next to the cell door. It's a clipboard. He looks at the prisoner's uniform and notes his name before writing it down. The large guard asks over his shoulder, "So, what are we thinking? 1 day? 2? For this one?" One of the other guards answers, "He deserves a lot more than that for what he did." "Why, what'd he do?" asks the big one. "He attacked one of the nurses. She's in pretty bad shape." One of the nurses? The veins in the larger guard's head start to bulge out as his grip on the pencil tightens. "Who was it?" It was Gloria," the guard answers. The pencil snaps in the giant guard's hand. One of the guards quickly picks it up and hands it back to him. Through gritted teeth, he answers, "I see." As the giant guard stares at him with angry, violent eyes, the prisoner starts to slink back into the dark cell, terrified of what's going to happen to him. "You like to attack nurses, do you? Well, we're gonna give you plenty of time to think about that. I'll see you in a year." The two other guards look at each other, clearly thinking that this is extreme even for a crime like this. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" one of them asks. But it's already too late. The guard has penciled in the date for exactly 1 year later. "No, please, no!" the prisoner screams, rushing towards the bars and reaching out as if it will somehow help him. But it doesn't. There's a faint rustling of wind that seems to carry the sound of whispers, and then the prisoner vanishes. He's simply gone, blinked out of existence. The guard hangs the clipboard back on the wall before turning and quickly walking away. He needs to get to the infirmary. The two guards can do nothing but shrug at each other and follow after him. "Poor guy," one of them whispers as they walk away from the empty cell. 1 year to the day later, the huge guard walks down the same prison corridor. It's late at night, and as he walks along, he lets his baton hit against the bars of the cells, making a loud clatter. "Wake up, everyone, wake up. It's a homecoming day." Sleepy prisoners get up out of their beds and stand at the front of their cells, trying their best to look through the bars to see the cell at the end of the block. "See what happens when you mess with staff? Come on, get up, today's the day. It's a homecoming." The guard gets to the end of the corridor and stops in front of the empty cell with the clipboard hanging on the wall next to it. The door is open, and there's nothing inside the dark cell except for the same dirty toilet and bed. The guard takes out his pocket watch and checks the time. Everyone, the guard and the prisoners alike, are all focused on the empty cell. The guard checks his watch again. The minute hand ticks over to midnight, and the moment it does, the cell door slides shut and locks with a loud click. The prison is completely silent, each inmate waiting with bated breath to see what happens next. The guard takes out a large, heavy ring of keys and inserts one into the cell door before stepping inside. He looks around, and still it appears that nothing inside is different. But then he spots what he's looking for. There in the corner, near the toilet, is a huddled figure in a striped prison uniform. Well, there you are." The guard starts to walk towards this person who has somehow appeared in the cell, but the huddled figure doesn't move or react in any way. The guard reaches down and puts a hand on the man to flip him over. "How'd you enjoy your stay?" Solitary confinement is one of the most brutal forms of punishment that is still in use across much of the world today. The psychological and physical distress that comes from days, weeks, months, even sometimes years spent alone can be devastating. But as horrible as this practice is, there exists a form of retribution that is even more terrifying. One that even the most hardened of criminals fear and would do anything to avoid. This is SCP-2701, also known as True Solitary. SCP-2701 is a seemingly standard-looking prison cell located in a now-condemned Pennsylvania State Penitentiary. The prison, which was built in the early mid-1800s, was showing its age long before it was finally shut down, and the cell contains only an old toilet and bed, with a clipboard hanging to the left of the cell with various forms marked as intake. The cell's construction materials appear normal, and the contents themselves are non-anomalous. It is only when someone is placed inside of SCP-2701 and the clipboard next to the cell is used that its frightening effects become evident. When a human being is locked within the cell, their name is written on the intake form and a date is filled in under the Release Date section. SCP-2701's anomalous activation event is put in motion. 13 seconds after these conditions have been met, the person inside will disappear, completely vanishing from view as if they simply no longer exist. Any attempts to better understand the process by which they dematerialize have been unsuccessful, as all recording equipment looking into or placed inside the cell will show only static or blank images during the 13 seconds before the subject disappears. Researchers observing the effect in person, though, have reported the sounds of wind and unidentified whispering voices, but it is still unknown what may be producing these. At 12:00 a.m. on the dot on the release date, the cell's door will somehow close and lock itself if it is not already shut. At this exact moment, the person who vanished will reappear within the locked cell. Unfortunately for the person who was locked inside, while they may have returned to our reality, it is unlikely that they will ever be the same. Experiments into SCP-2701 have revealed that those who are placed inside and vanish will experience a state of complete sensory deprivation while remaining fully conscious the entire time. They experience no sounds, smells, or sense of touching anything. They do not even see darkness, since that would imply sight. Instead, they truly experience no senses at all. This effect can be disastrous for the human psyche, with subjects reporting that they have developed intense fears of both shadows and light, claustrophobia, agoraphobia, and a fear of going to sleep following their time within SCP-2701. At the same time, they will have experienced no physical changes at all, including aging, no matter how much time has passed. But the worst part of SCP-2701 is that those who are locked inside do not experience time at the same rate as you or I. No, tests have revealed that once someone disappears from within the cell, they will feel as if time has been significantly stretched out, with the dilation effect causing them to perceive time at a rate that has been estimated to be between 300 and 400 times longer than normal. That means that someone placed inside for 2 hours will experience time as if they had been locked away for 25 to 33 days, while someone placed inside for a whole year will feel as though they have been floating in a void of nothingness for several centuries. Foundation researchers have theorized that the absence of any outside stimulation for that long of a period causes the mind to break down rational thought structures in an effort to mitigate stress, and that a complete psychological breakdown soon follows. In order to better understand the effects of SCP-2701, the SCP Foundation embarked on a number of tests using Class D personnel. In one experiment, which was performed on a D-Class known as D-77391, the event started at 11:45 p.m., and the release date was set for the coming midnight. This led to the D-Class being inside the cell for 15 minutes, though they experienced their time within as having lasted 75 to 100 hours. When D-77391 was interviewed 6 hours after reappearing, they described their time inside as being a true hell. Experiencing nothing but emptiness, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't sleep, they couldn't even scream. They were left alone with only their thoughts and memories. The only thing that kept them from completely losing their mind was something one of the researchers told them before they entered the cell. The researcher told them that no matter what they felt, that they had to hold on to the idea that they were going to come back. They needed to remember they wouldn't be in there forever. While these words of encouragement did seem to stave off the worst of the mental effects D-77391 could have suffered, they also impacted the results of the experiment, and the offending researcher was later reassigned to a different project, following a 6-month suspension. The SCP Foundation first became aware of SCP-2701 following reports of certain abnormalities at a Pennsylvania State Penitentiary. There were numerous complaints by lawyers that they were not being allowed to meet with their clients, and that they were being denied access to the site by the prison's warden. When police were finally dispatched to the site to investigate, it was discovered that the entire prison, which previously housed 137 inmates and employed a number of staff, had only one inhabitant: the warden. He described the activation procedure for Cell 667 and explained that he had placed every single prisoner inside, one by one, and made them disappear. He had been keeping the funds that were supposed to be used for the care of the inmates, as well as to bribe officials and former staff in order to keep the warden's scheme secret and prevent any official inquiries. The warden surrendered to the police without incident, and an undercover Foundation agent within the Philadelphia police soon alerted SCP agents to the cell's anomalous effects. When a Foundation team arrived on site, they found the cell exactly as described, along with the intake forms. The prison warden had been telling the truth. Over 100 forms were filled out with inmates' names, with release dates ranging from 50 to over 1,300 years in the future. The ease with which SCP-2701 is able to be contained has led to it receiving the Safe classification. The former prison where SCP-2701 is located is monitored at all times by video and audio surveillance, and a security guard equipped with full-body restraints is present at all times to both detain any subjects who appear within the cell, as well as prevent any new ones from being placed inside that aren't a part of an official SCP Foundation experiment.
A climber struggles on the side of the mountain. He's so close to the summit of Mount Everest that he can taste it. He just needs to triumph over this last difficult section, and he will have fulfilled his lifetime dream of standing at the top of the world. He needs to hurry, though. At this altitude, the air is so thin and the temperature is so cold that your body is slowly dying. There's a reason this topmost section of the mountain is known as the Death Zone. He glances down behind him and spots something. Is that another climber? That's strange, he thinks. He was at the very back of his group, and there shouldn't have been anyone else coming up behind him. It must be a solo climber. The soloist doesn't look to be moving, though. He's just staring at him, and the climber can't seem to take his eyes off him. Suddenly, the climber starts feeling odd. He begins to feel warm and comfortable. The aches and pains of the long journey melt away. He decides to sit down on a small ledge and relax. He watches as the solo climber comes towards him. He must be a professional with the way he effortlessly moves up the mountain. He watches him make great time, getting closer and closer. He loses sight as the solo climber reaches the same difficult section he had been struggling with. He imagines the solo climber will soon zip past him on his way to the summit. But just then, the soloist pops up right in front of him. He clasps his hands on the climber's shoulders and pulls him close, staring into his eyes with those dark, black goggles. They feel like they're pulling him into their depths, and there's nothing he can do to resist it. The climber tries to scream, but all that comes out of his mouth is silence. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-1529, also known as King of the Mountain. But first, a quick personal request from me. I need your help to spread the word about the lesser-known anomalies in the SCP Foundation's archives. The best thing you can do to help me is subscribe, turn on notifications, and then go tell your friends to do the same. This is a huge help and will let me bring you more and more SCP videos. Now, back to our file. SCP-1529 is an entity with a humanoid appearance that resides near the summit of Mount Everest in Nepal. It is only found above 8,000 meters, which places it in the part of the mountain referred to as the Death Zone, where oxygen levels are too low to support human life for any extended period of time. It is roughly equivalent to an average human male in height and weight, and its outer appearance resembles normal mountaineering clothes, with a heavy parka, pants, and boots that are all white in color. Its face is completely obscured by a large hood, with the only visible detail being a pair of large, dark goggles. SCP-1529 has never been seen wearing any other outfit, and in fact, it is unknown whether these are articles of clothing at all, or if they are actually a part of its body. The SCP Foundation first became aware of an anomalous entity lurking near the top of Mount Everest in the 1970s, when climbing expeditions to the summit became more commonplace among professional and amateur mountaineers alike. Rumors began to spread and told of a monster that was killing unfortunate climbers. In 1999, the body of George Mallory, who is believed to be the first person to reach the top of Mount Everest, was located, and photographic film found on his body was developed. From those pictures, it is now known that SCP-1529 was present at least as early as his 1924 expedition. When sufficient daylight and a lack of cloud cover allows observation of the peak by telescope, SCP-1529 can be seen sitting or lying on the mountain, apparently motionless in an inactive state. These motionless periods have been seen to last anywhere from 17 minutes
to as long as 8 months. When active, though, it can be seen summiting and descending the upper portion of the mountain, though it never uses any climbing tools and will ignore established climbing ropes and ladders that have been installed by other climbers. It has also been observed easily traversing portions of the mountain that are considered too difficult or altogether impossible by experienced climbers. Additionally, SCP-1529 is not impacted by the freezing temperatures, extreme wind speeds, or low oxygen levels at the top of the mountain, and it has never once been seen to stumble, fall, or even lose its grip. It is unknown what prompts SCP-1529 to become active or enter a resting inactive phase, nor has there been any established correlation of these phases to weather, time of year, or traffic on the mountain. Its active periods have been observed to last between mere hours to several days, but the exact amount is hard to know for sure. Nighttime observation of 1529 has so far been impossible, even with thermal imaging cameras, since it produces no heat, with its temperatures being the same as that of the surrounding environment. When in its active phase, if a human climber passes the 8,000-meter mark, then SCP-1529 will begin to make its way towards them, putting itself in the path between the climber and either the summit if they are ascending, or their camp if they are descending. It seems to prefer to go after solo climbers, or those that are significantly ahead or behind their climbing group, but it has been observed targeting climbers in a group when a solo opportunity is not available. Once SCP-1529 is within eyesight of its targeted climber, it will attempt to gain their attention and then lock eyes with them, which produces a hypnotic effect. The climber will find that they are unable to break eye contact with SCP-1529, and will then begin to experience feelings of warmth and euphoria, similar to the effects of hypothermia and hypoxia, also known as altitude sickness. The victim will feel the overwhelming desire to sit down where they are, and once they stop moving, SCP-1529 will quickly close the distance between them. Once SCP-1529 reaches the victim, death is almost a certainty. An examination of bodies has shown the cause to be from hypothermia. Strangely, it's been observed that victims seem to succumb within just 1 to 2 hours after having first made eye contact with SCP-1529, a period of time much shorter than usual for climbers trapped on the summit of Everest. After death, the victims' bodies experience an accelerated rate of decay, and after mere hours or days, the bodies become rotted and mummified at a level comparable to bodies that have been exposed to the wind and cold of the mountain for decades. Many of the over 200 deaths on Mount Everest have been attributed to SCP-1529, and the rare survivor of an encounter is almost always due to the intervention of another mountaineer, who was able to offer assistance to the entranced climber before SCP-1529 was able to reach them. There have been several notable reports from survivors of interactions with SCP-1529. One, known as Incident 1529-1, is also the only documented instance of SCP-1529 descending below the 8,000-meter mark. During the incident, the entity entered Camp 5, located on the northern approach of the mountain at 7,775 meters, which resulted in multiple deaths, including 2 Foundation personnel who were operating the monitoring posts. One climber, who had initially believed to have been killed in the incident, was discovered to still be alive 2 days later when Foundation personnel were conducting investigations at the camp. He was safely removed from the mountain, though he required the amputation of several frostbitten fingers and toes. During an interview with a Foundation agent, they described spotting SCP-1529 just 10 minutes after leaving the summit of the mountain. After locking eyes with the entity, they began to feel happy, comfortable, and relieved, like they were back at home next to a warm fire. But then suddenly the warmth was gone, and they experienced a sensation of cold more powerful than anything they had felt before. They were stuck, and could only watch as 1529 made its way towards them. When it finally reached them, it placed its hands on their shoulders and pulled them up into its face so that they were staring right into its black goggles. Images began to appear in the dark depths of the goggles. People warm and happy, sitting next to fires, in hot baths, or sunning on a beach. They tried to resist the strange pull of the creature with all of their might. They then heard something in their mind, a question from SCP-1529. It asked, "You would refuse my gift?" The stranded climber struggled to answer, using all of their willpower and strength to move their lips and whisper a single word. Yes. SCP-1529 responded by showing more images of people, but this time, they were bodies lying dead in the snow. Countless victims trapped on Mount Everest forever. SCP-1529 made them watch their deaths play out in long, drawn-out detail, a witness to every second of their demise. The climber was sure they would soon join them, but then they found something deep inside of them, a spark of life, a will to resist. They clenched their fist, and with their final ounce of strength, they punched SCP-1529. The goggles appeared to crack, and the next thing the climber knew, they were woken up by the Foundation recovery team. Following this encounter, the climber never attempted to summit another mountain. When they eventually passed away some years later, an autopsy revealed that their cause of death was consistent with extreme hypothermia, frostbite, and cerebral edema, despite not having been in a cold environment or above 500 meters in altitude in the previous 12 months. SCP-1529 has been classified as Euclid and is to be kept under telescope and satellite surveillance whenever possible, though telescope observation should make use of a delayed video feed, as observers have reported seeing SCP-1529 appearing to stare back at them and reported feeling symptoms consistent with an encounter, including hypothermia and frostbite. The Foundation maintains communication with civilian mountaineering expeditions to prevent summiting attempts when SCP-1529 is active. The bodies of any victims are to be removed from the mountain if possible for autopsy, with their deaths being officially classified as having been from natural causes related to altitude sickness and hypothermia. Any survivors of encounters with SCP-1529 are to be debriefed and administered amnestics. Mobile Task Force Psi-29029, also known as Alpine Echo, is to remain on standby at all times at a permanent monitoring station, with on-duty members remaining in a pressurized environment acclimatized to 7,900 meters above sea level, allowing them to quickly deploy via helicopter if need be. Finally, and most troubling, is that aerial surveillance of another mountain has revealed an individual similar in appearance to SCP-1529. The location remains classified, and the local government has prohibited climbing on the peak, so threats to humanity are minimal at this time. But the Foundation will continue to monitor it and other mountains for anomalous activity.
It's an average day at Site 43 of the SCP Foundation, and a new researcher has arrived for her first day at the site. She fills out an intimidating stack of onboarding paperwork, takes a picture for her new ID badge, and meets her direct supervisor.
"There's something you should probably know about working at this site," he begins, but an alarm sounds down the hall, and he has to rush away to attend to it. "We'll finish this later, don't move," he calls to her before he disappears from sight. Then she's left alone, twiddling her thumbs, shifting from foot to foot, and looking at her new workplace. It looks like any other Foundation site for the most part. One unusual thing does catch her eye, though. There are mirrors everywhere, all along the walls of the hallway, seemingly all the way down until the hallway bends out of sight. What could those possibly be for? As she runs through the possibilities in her head, she hears the squeaking wheels of a mop cart coming toward her. A janitor is making his way across the floor, mopping at the tiles as he goes. He has a pair of headphones covering his ears, and she thinks about interrupting him to ask about the mirrors, but doesn't want to disturb him. Then, she spots something just behind the janitor, reflected in the mirror, that makes her scream and drop her clipboard. There is a face, ashen and ghastly, like some horrible phantom out of a scary story. She spins around, expecting to see the horrible face lurking behind her, but there's nothing there. Whatever the thing is, it's just in the mirror. When her supervisor returns, he finds her pale and sweating, her hands shaking. She stumbles over her words, trying to tell him what she just saw. He laughs at her wide-eyed expression and says, "Oh, don't worry, that's just Philip and his constant companion." Then, he tells her all about SCP-5056. SCP-5056 is a hairless humanoid entity with gray matte skin and 3 slash-like scars on its face, resembling the placement of eyes and a mouth. It does not have a physical, corporeal form, at least on the visual spectrum, and can only be seen in reflective surfaces. It appears to prefer manifesting in glass, especially mirrors and lenses. Any equipment or media that captures the entity's image will begin to degrade on an atomic level. Though anyone can see SCP-5056 when it appears in a reflective surface, only one person is able to hear it speak. Philip E. Deering, also referred to as SCP-5056-B. Philip Deering is a white man with brown eyes and brown hair, standing at 172 centimeters tall. He joined the staff of SCP Foundation Site-43 as a custodian in July of 1999, and for his first 3 years of service, there was nothing notable about him. He was a pleasant man, though occasionally prone to bouts of depression, and was a reliable employee. In September of 2002, however, his behavior changed following a disastrous incident involving anomalous materials in Achromatic Abatement Facility AAF-D. After this incident occurred, Philip began exhibiting signs of auditory hallucinations, reacting to sounds that no one else could hear. At first, this was thought to be the result of a mental health episode brought on by stress and trauma, but the discovery of SCP-5056 soon proved that the voice he was hearing was not, in fact, in his head. Since the first day it appeared to him, SCP-5056 has followed Philip everywhere he goes. It has not expressed interest in any other people or entities, except for situations where it felt that Philip was being threatened. It is aware of other entities, it simply does not care about them. As for its behavior toward Philip, SCP-5056 has historically behaved in a way opposite to Philip's emotional needs. When Philip is trying to sleep, it opens its mouth scar and screams. It picks verbal fights with him when he is overwhelmed or sad, including reminding him of estranged family members, awkward social interactions, and personal failings. He has gotten used to his companion over the years, even giving notes on its less than effective insults and encouraging creativity. He has even given the entity a nickname, Doug. SCP-5056 becomes enraged when separated from Philip, and if there is no available reflective surface upon which it can manifest and speak to him, it will begin to act out. After 9 seconds have passed without SCP-5056 having access to Philip, it will begin to vibrate at an intense speed and emit an endless 119 decibel sound that reverberates through the entirety of Site-43. As soon as Philip is returned to 5056's line of sight, both the sound and the vibrating will immediately stop. Staff in the area have been made aware of the entity's presence and its aggressive tendencies. Following an incident involving Dr. Bradbury, who experienced immense psychological distress after SCP-5056 appeared in one of the lenses of her eyeglasses that led to her eventual resignation, no one wearing glasses or any other reflective eyewear is permitted to interact with Philip or SCP-5056. Because SCP-5056 has no physical body, it cannot be truly contained in a traditional sense. However, its location seems to be bound to Philip's, and therefore limiting Philip's movements to Site-43 has provided the Foundation with a workable solution. Aside from the issue with Dr. Bradbury, there has only been one other notable incident involving SCP-5056 so far. On January 23, 2003, Dr. Falkirk decided to perform an experiment that would prove Philip was not necessary for the containment of SCP-5056. Philip was sent to an observation room and instructed to turn on recording equipment. In the room, there was a steel table, a steel chair, and a hand mirror. After Philip sat down in the room, SCP-5056 warned him to get out. He ignored it and proceeded to talk with Dr. Falkirk. Falkirk gave an order to initiate Phase 2 of the experiment, and Philip began to have trouble breathing. After several seconds, he lost consciousness. Dr. Falkirk turned his and his assistant's attention to the mirror, where SCP-5056 was still present. It became enraged, yelling for Philip, and attacked Dr. Falkirk. Though the specific details of the attack are lost from official records, he was subsequently given medical treatment for blood loss, facial injuries, and the loss of his left eye. He has been under intensive psychological care ever since. Though no one but Philip is able to hear a word SCP-5056 says, any recording device that he activates will pick up the entity's voice. In order to give the research team a better sense of SCP-5056's behavior, Philip's uniform contains a microphone that is always on and always recording his conversations. It has, over the years, picked up everything that passes between Philip and the world around him, from his conversations with co-workers to the tiny torments and verbal barbs from SCP-5056. In 2020, however, the microphone recorded a series of events that would change Philip and his relationship to the anomaly in the mirror forever. Philip was struggling with a sense of crushing isolation, with the majority of his social interaction coming from Dr. Ngo and SCP-5056. The only bright spot in his days was the presence of Chief Amelia Tarosian of the Janitorial and Maintenance Section, who would often visit Philip to chat while he was mopping. They spoke regularly for months, joking with each other about work, Amelia asking questions about Philip's life with 5056, all while the entity needled Philip about his apparent crush on Amelia. On September 9, 2020, however, Amelia confessed something. She returned his feelings. The audio transcription from this day captured this revelation. "I never really thought... I didn't think you..." Philip began. "Really? Really?" Amelia retorted. "Yeah, really. Well, I mean, I didn't think you... either," she admitted. Philip laughed at this. "Are you kidding? You've got to be kidding. I mean, you're A moment of silence passed between the two, the air crackling with nervous excitement. "How long," he began. She interrupted. "Since I met you." He laughed again, a giddy sound. "You had that on speed dial." "Well, how long?" she started. This time, he interrupted. "Since I met you." They both laughed for a long time before falling silent once again. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked. "Can't you tell?" She shook her head. "No? Confusing me with your anxiety surrogate?" "He hasn't said a word tonight." Philip smiled softly at this. "I must not have any anxieties right now." The two quickly developed a romantic relationship, Philip brushing off the doubts that SCP-5056 tried to plant in his mind. On June 11, 2021, Dr. Ngo conducted Philip's annual psychological review, and they discussed the notable changes in his demeanor and worldview. The audio from the session has been transcribed. "Thanks for letting me do this a day early," Philip began. "Well, hey, I have a social engagement tomorrow," Dr. Ngo replied. Philip laughed heartily at that. "You know, that might be the first time I've heard you laugh. Let's talk about that." SCP-5056 started to speak.
Yes, let's talk about...
But Philip cut it off. "About how humorless and morose I am?" The entity was stunned into silence. Dr. Ngo spoke up. Was he about to say that? Are you finishing his thoughts now? "Why not? They used to be my thoughts." "What changed?" SCP-5056 spoke up again.
Nothing.
Philip disagreed. "A lot of things. Some of them because of Doug, some of them because of me, some of them..." Chief Tarosian, Dr. Ngo finished the thought for him. "Yeah, I guess I didn't really care about improving myself until I had someone to improve for. Doug beat a lot of my flaws out of me. There just wasn't enough room in my head for self-pity or self-loathing or even selfishness with him nattering away in the background all day, every day. But Amy gave me something to actually work toward. This time, 5056 finished his thought.
You stopped wasting your life.
"Go on," Dr. Ngo encouraged. "It feels strange to say, because this has been a terrible year all over, but it still meant so much to me." Dr. Ngo nodded. "You achieved something." "I achieved something, and I reached out. My life isn't one long, indifferently narrated one-man show anymore. Sure, I'm still stuck underground, but I'm not alone down here anymore." SCP-5056 spoke up, giving one final thought.
You are never alone, Philip. You will never ever be alone. Never again.
"What's he saying? Something spooky?" Dr. Ngo asked. Philip shook his head. "It's phrased that way, but that's not how I'm taking it." The next morning, Philip prepared to take a life-changing step. He stood in front of a mirror, dressed in a tuxedo, and adjusted his bow tie. "How do I look, Doug?" he asked, "because I can't see with you in the mirror." SCP-5056 replied,
You're making a mistake.
Philip laughed it off. "Yeah, I've never been good at bow ties. I'd use a clip-on, but Amy would never forgive me, and anyway, it would clash with the tuxedo." SCP-5056 pushed further, refusing to let it go.
You aren't ready for this.
"I definitely am. But hey, if you have objections, feel free to shout them out at the appropriate time. Nobody but me will hear you, but if you make good points, I'll be sure to pass them along."
You won't hold up your end.
"I'd do anything for her."
You don't have the energy.
"I've never felt this good. Are you even trying here, buddy?"
It won't change who you are.
"It already has."
It won't fix you.
Philip laughed, pulling his bow tie tight. He turned away from the mirror and toward the next chapter of his life with one final statement. "I don't need to be fixed." As long as she had known him, Amelia Tarosian had demonstrated kindness, care, empathy, and curiosity toward Philip. Unlike her colleagues, she was not put off by the presence of SCP-5056, but approached it with an open mind and an appreciation for the entirety of Philip's self, the man beyond the anomaly. The two were married in Ipperwash Provincial Park on June 12, 2021, and have been together ever since. Notably, Amelia has reported that SCP-5056 remains largely dormant in her presence, allowing the two to spend their time together without interruption. Following Philip's relationship with Amelia and the improvement to his mental state, as well as changes to SCP-5056's behavior, the Foundation conducted a review and reassessment of the anomaly. Several high-ranking Foundation staff wrote down their changing thoughts on SCP-5056 and contributed them to the official revised file. Amelia R. Tarosian, chief of the Janitorial and Maintenance Section and wife of Philip Deering, wrote, "I don't think anyone understood Doug when he first manifested. They all thought he was an anomalous abuser, a demon with a short fuse, existing just to get a rise out of someone. They tell me Phil was plenty risible back then, introverted and absent-minded, the perfect jump scare target. But once he stopped being jumpy, Doug started needling him about his low self-esteem. Once he started standing up for himself, Doug made him worry about other people's needs. By the time I met him in 2019, Phil was considerate, unflappable, and still absolutely miserable. That's when Doug started bugging him about his love life. I don't think Doug is preying on Phil. I think he's trying to help. Dr. Harold R. Blank, chair of the Archives and Revision section, contributed, "For the longest time, we thought Phil might be anomalous as well. We even tossed around the idea of classing him Thaumiel, which obviously didn't fly. At the very least, we were pretty sure Doug was an unconscious manifestation of his internal monologue, so we labeled it 5056-A and made him 5056-B. After nearly 2 decades of observation, however, I can say with near certainty that there is nothing at all remarkable about Philip Eugene Deering beyond his unusual equanimity in the face of enduring trauma. He is no longer considered an SCP object, and his paranormal paramour has been reclassified as simply SCP-5056. A self-containing, incorporeal emotional parasite requiring no containment because it voluntarily restricts itself to the presence of a man who voluntarily restricts himself to a secure underground bunker. We're still not sure what will happen when Phil dies, but my guess is 5056 gets one last class change to neutralized." Dr. Melissa Bradbury, chair of the Research and Experimentation section, included, "No, I can't tell you what I saw, but I can tell you what I felt. That's only after more than a decade of Foundation psychotherapy, mind you. I was comatose for 11 months and endured 3 years of blurry vision because I couldn't put on a pair of specs or contact lenses without having a panic attack. When that thing filled up my vision, it felt like someone had gut-punched my brain. You know that late-night experience where you suddenly remember some stupid or embarrassing thing you did in your life and it makes you feel ashamed? Well, imagine if you suddenly thought of every stupid or embarrassing thing you'd ever done, all at once, like your conscience finally got fed up and decided to go nuclear on you. No wonder Falkirk tore his eye out." Delfina M. Ibanez, chief of the Pursuit and Suppression section, had this to say, "When Blank said we should let Deering keep playing janitor under his pet monster's watchful eye scars, I was skeptical. I was chief of security and containment, and that sounded like the polar opposite of both concepts. I'm happy to say I was wrong. Deering has absolutely nil combat utility, and without 5056, his disaster response priority would be somewhere just above the D class, and we don't even have D class at 43. But with 5056, he's practically an intruder deterrent system. You know what they say, a friend is someone who will help you move, a best friend is someone who will disintegrate your enemy's eyes." Dr. Noon T. Ngo, chair of the Psychology and Parapsychology section, wrote, "SCP-5056 has co-opted JM64's negative thought processes, externalizing his melancholy and self-doubt. His earliest psych evaluation suggested a proclivity towards intrusive anxious thoughts. Because these thoughts are now literally intrusive, he can assess them much more rationally than he could without anomalous intervention. We still don't know what 5056 is, but I can say this much. It is devoted to its opposite number and wants to help him. It expresses affection in a grating, alien manner, but there's no arguing with the results. It's taken 19 years, but Deering has finally made peace with himself. Of course, he's had a little extra help in that regard." Finally, Dr. Polixeni Metaxas, chair of the Spectrometry and Spectrometry section, said, "They've called this a haunting for 19 years. It's even entered the general terminology. A Deering-class haunting denotes the stalking of a corporeal being by an incorporeal one. Nobody really thinks of 5056 as a ghost, however. Nobody but me. The materials handling disaster which created Doug also annihilated at least 2 of our subjects in containment. The nature of those subjects is highly classified, but I can say this much. They are intimately connected to the cycles of guilt and apathy through which human society writ large regularly cycles. Is it too much of a stretch to suggest that one of them, or a fragment of one of them, was reconstituted in that thaumaturgical soup into Deering's inescapable conscience? If that's what happened, well, perhaps it still doesn't make him all that different from the rest of us. We're all haunted by something, and we're all haunting something ourselves. Our hopes and fears are just voices in our heads that only we can hear. Everything we are is just the hallucination of a hollow frame of meat and bone. So what separates us from the thing on the other side of the mirror? 3 dimensions and room to grow. Since the reassessment, the containment measures for SCP-5056 have been updated. It is now considered to be self-containing, with its position fixed to that of Philip. Philip is prohibited from leaving SCP Foundation facilities without direction from Security Clearance Level 4+ personnel, and must carry at least 1 reflective object on his person at all times. Any new or visiting staff must be briefed by Philip on the nature of SCP-5056. He is also required to undergo mental health treatment, mainly exposure response prevention therapy, which allows him to respond to his intrusive thoughts without acting on them. Though SCP-5056 once terrified Philip, bringing him endless distress, he has grown accustomed to its presence. Even when the things 5056 tells him are upsetting, he considers them to be necessary reflections of his inner life, providing him with introspection he has never been capable of on his own. Since Philip's marriage, the entity has grown more and more passive, appearing only to bring up areas that need improvement in the relationship, reminding Philip of ways he can be a better husband to Amelia. Just as Philip has become more comfortable with the presence of SCP-5056, so too has the rest of the Foundation staff. Perhaps, even if they're not entirely aware of it, they recognize something of themselves in that dynamic. Don't we all live with demons of our own, constant companions whispering our insecurities back to us, reminding us of the ways in which we fall short? They may not be as anomalous as SCP-5056, but their hold on us can be just as powerful, just as destructive. The only way to contain them is to look them in the face, learn to talk back, and decide against all odds to go after what we want anyway. We may never be truly rid of them, never be completely alone, and without that gray shadow lurking at our side. But that's okay. We can carry it with us, accepting that our fears, our hurts, our nagging anxieties are necessary parts of who we are. But we can also argue back against the voice that tells us we'll never be truly happy and say, yes, I will, because I deserve it. Eventually, we might just believe it enough for that voice to finally shut up.
The hitman pulls back the hammer of his Beretta with his thumb. The suppressor screwed into the barrel will help muffle the terrible crime he's about to commit. They're in the middle of the forest, his victim on his knees in front of him, his hands bound behind his back. The victim is spewing out excuses and feeble pleas for mercy at a mile a minute, but the hitman remains firm, aiming his handgun at the back of the victim's head. The victim owes his boss a great deal of money, but the hitman can't remember all the details. All he knows is what he needs to do. Bang, bang, bang. 3 clean shots turned into cracks by the suppressor. His victim slumps forward, dead. It's time for the hitman to go home. The job isn't as glamorous as it is in the movies. He lives alone in a relatively small apartment. Most nights, he doesn't sleep well. He has nightmares. He sees every face he sent a bullet through every time he closes his eyes. So, to make himself feel better, he watches his comfort movies with a bowl of microwaved SpaghettiOs. He's been through his DVD collection 1,000 times. None of it has the punch it used to. But he's still got a working VCR, so there's no harm in fishing through the old pile of VHS tapes he keeps in his closet. That's where he finds his well-worn childhood copy of Forrest Gump. It used to be his mom's favorite movie. Perhaps it'll help him sleep tonight. He slots the VHS into the VCR. All the memories are flooding back to him now. He watched this movie so many times as a kid. It's a miracle that he didn't entirely wear the tape out. He's ready to lose himself in the film as he watches Forrest in his white suit sitting on that iconic park bench. The hitman smiles, ready to speak along to the movie's most famous line, "Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." But when Forrest says the line, it's "Life was like a box of chocolates." Was. How strange. He doesn't remember the line being like that. It's "Life is like a box of chocolates," not "Life was," right? You wouldn't think such a tiny misquote would bother a man who kills people for the mafia for a living. But it does. This mistake feels so oddly pivotal to his understanding of the film, and therefore, to his understanding of himself. It feels like having a bucket of cold water poured out onto his head. He watches the rest of the movie, but something is off. He feels almost like Forrest Gump himself knows he's been watching. And scarier still, he's watching back. What happened to this nostalgic childhood classic? Over the next week, as he executes more deadbeats and poor unfortunate souls on behalf of his shadowy bosses, he just can't stop thinking about that line. Life was like a box of chocolates. There's something wrong about it, something so terribly wrong. How can he shoot a man dead without losing his appetite? But thinking about Forrest Gump is making his hands shake. He watches the movie every night. Some nights, he watches it more than once, instead of sleeping or showering. Every time he watches it, it feels just a little more uncanny.
This movie used to fill him with joy and hope. It made him see the beauty in the world. But now he sees the darkness hiding underneath the surface. Every time he watches, he feels a growing suspicion towards the Forrest Gump character. Every so often, Forrest looks directly at the camera, staring out at the hitman and smiling. The hitman is sleeping even less now. He gets this feeling that something terrible is going to happen. It's funny. Normally he's the terrible thing that happens to people. A few nights later, he's in the forest again, with another pleading victim on his knees in front of him. They all blur together eventually, but tonight, something is different. There's a certain chill in the air. The gun feels a little heavier in his hand. He presses the suppressed Beretta against the back of his victim's head and prepares to pull the trigger when he hears a twig snap. The hitman looks up, worried, and sees someone else standing in the forest, peeking out from behind the tree. A witness, but not just any witness. A familiar face. Is that? No, it can't be. Is that Forrest Gump? Before he can orient himself, his victim gets up and runs for it. The hitman is snapped free of his stupor, and Forrest Gump is gone. In a blind panic, he runs after the victim fleeing through the forest. He draws a bead on the victim's back and fires, sending a bullet through him and dropping him to the ground. He catches up shortly after that and finishes him off. He finished the job, but he can't shake the terrified feeling of what happened. He could swear he saw Forrest Gump in the forest, watching him, and that can only mean one of two things. Either he's being stalked, or he's losing his mind entirely. His obsession with the film gets worse after that. He'll spend whole days just watching it again and again, back to back, trying to find the secrets that must be buried somewhere within. Sadly for him, all he finds each time is more dread. He comes to believe that the movie is truly evil, that it contains some kind of entity that is more than human, more cruel, more terrible, and more powerful. Could this have been what he saw in the woods? At night, he hears noises, footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment, and then outside his bedroom. Once upon a time, he would have worried that he's been monitored by the city's police or agents from the FBI. Now, he's worried that he's being watched by something different altogether. He starts sleeping with his gun under his pillow. It's the only way he can feel anything close to safe with that thing out there, looking for him, hunting him. But if it came for him, would bullets even be able to stop it? The hitman stops going to work. He doesn't feel safe outside his apartment anymore. His bosses are confused, perhaps even a little concerned, worried that maybe their best hired gun has gone federal. But no, he's gone insane. But that doesn't mean he isn't right. He rarely changes out of his pajamas. He's tired, jittery, filthy, with a scraggly beard growing out of his chin. All he does these days is rewatch the movie. He thinks that if he watches it enough, he'll find some way to stop this terrible feeling he's been going through. But maybe it's making it worse, deepening his obsession. In every scene, he can feel Forrest Gump watching him through the screen. He always gives an evil grin, the same one he sometimes sees through his bedroom window in the middle of the night. Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. That's when he hears the door to his apartment open behind him. He grips his gun and rises to his feet. He can feel that a terrifying presence has entered the apartment. He needs to fight this thing, or he's going to die. He runs out into the hall of his apartment, ready to take on the threat head on. He wants to put a stop to the monster that has been making his life hell for all of these weeks. But the second he sees the figure standing in the shadows, he freezes up. It's him. It's the one and only Forrest Gump, wearing a terrifying evil smirk like a hungry predator. The hitman raises his gun and fires at the impossible intruder, but the bullets seem to have no effect. Gump lunges forward quickly and smashes the gun out of the hitman's hand with an effortless slap. All the hitman can do is turn and run, fleeing down the hallway into his bedroom and locking himself in. Bang, bang, bang. He can feel Gump smashing his fists against the door. The hitman covers his ears, huddles next to his bed, and cries. He's never been this terrified before, not even as a child. Then the door shatters into splinters, and Gump, full of fury, enters. In what could be his dying moments, the hitman's animal brain takes over. He turns and tries to run, but Gump is far too fast. He rushes up, grabs the hitman by his shoulder from behind, and forces him down onto his knees. The hitman can't move. Gump is holding him in place, iron-like.
Gump clenches his spare fist, lifts it up, and brings it down onto the back of the hitman's head with monstrous force. He will be found dead later that day. Crime scene cameras flash, capturing the grisly scene in the hitman's former apartment. The hitman's body is rolled onto a gurney and covered with a white sheet, rolled out of his apartment before decay can set in and destroy potentially valuable evidence. The lead detective on the scene is baffled by this whole setup. He's been aware of the hitman and his gang ties for years, but this death doesn't look like your typical gangland hit. After all, he'd been brutally bludgeoned to death. If he'd been done in by his fellow gangsters, he probably would have just been shot. There was no physical evidence of a forced entry or exit from the hitman's killer. Some of the hitman's neighbors had heard a handgun being discharged, but there is no blood from anyone other than the hitman on the scene, just spent shell casings and a few bullet holes in the wall. Strange. Would an experienced hitman fire that many times and miss his target with every single shot? Whoever took him out must have been truly dangerous. The detective does what he can, searching through the hitman's possessions while the CSI team strips down the rooms, hoping to find the piece of telltale evidence that could implicate the hitman's mysterious killer. The detective can't help but notice how filthy the apartment is. It looks like it hasn't been cleaned in weeks, a sharp contrast to the hitman's history of sharp, clean murders. It's the apartment of a man who knew someone was coming for him. But who? The detective just can't seem to piece it together. But during the search, the detective happens upon something that catches his eye, an old VHS copy of Forrest Gump. How strange. Who has a working VCR these days? The detective looks closer and sees that the VHS and its case are covered in smeared, dirty fingerprints. He's been watching this, or at least handling it, a lot. Maybe it's some vector for secret messages between him and his employers. Perhaps it has some unknown meaning. Maybe some illicit crime has been recorded over the movie. He bags the VHS as evidence and takes it back to the precinct, where his men rustle up a VCR and organize an impromptu screening. The detective is eager for a break in the case, but as the tape plays, it just seems to be Forrest Gump. The detective is extremely confused. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with the tape. Did the hitman just completely lose his mind by the time he was murdered? The detective's attention is jogged by one line, spoken by Forrest as he sits on the bench. Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Wait, that's not the line. Wasn't the line, life is like a box of chocolates? Later that night, the detective is lying in bed, unable to sleep. Somehow, it isn't the mystery of the hitman's murder that's keeping him awake. It's that one strange, misremembered line from Forrest Gump. He just can't get it out of his head. The only thing that draws his attention away is the sound of footsteps outside in the middle of the night. The detective snaps to attention, grabs his service weapon from his bedside cabinet, and creeps downstairs. He steps out of his house and into his backyard, now completely alert. The yard is mostly bathed in darkness, save for the little island of light formed by his porch light. Still, he sees something moving in the dark and levels his gun. He calls out, saying he's with the police, that it would be an extremely bad idea to try anything. There's no response. In a panic, the detective flees back into his home. Maybe this has something to do with the hitman's murder. Perhaps the perpetrators are trying to intimidate him into dropping the investigation. He'd call backup, he'd get some kind of assistance. But what the detective doesn't know is that it's already too late. He hears a noise outside again and looks up to see a face pressed up against his window. It's Forrest Gump, grinning maniacally. He reels back his head and slams it into the glass, sending cracks crawling out into every direction. He slams again and again and again. Before the detective can even react, the window is shattered, and Forrest Gump is climbing into his home with a single-minded, murderous purpose. It all makes sense to the detective now, in a deranged sort of way. The hitman hadn't been attacked by a vengeful enemy, or taken out as a liability by his employers. He'd been murdered by Forrest Gump. And now, the detective is going to suffer the same fate. This peculiar little tale probably feels rather far-fetched to you, even by the standards of the entities and phenomena researched by the SCP Foundation. But we assure you that if you ever find yourself afflicted with SCP-5346, what was once a bizarre little case study could become a horrifying reality. Not a great deal is known about the mechanics of how exactly SCP-5346 operates.
due to the rarity and obscurity of cases. But what we do know is that it affects people who view a certain scene in the beloved 1994 movie Forrest Gump, starring Tom Hanks as the titular lead character. The anomaly has a particular effect on those with an obsessive nature or people whose occupations involve needing to focus intensely on films, such as professional film critics. The scene in the film that appears to be the vector for infection is the one where Forrest is sitting on a park bench with a box of chocolates and opines that his mama always told him, "Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." The first sign of infection is that the person viewing the scene will immediately feel confused, believing the quote to be, "Life is like a box of chocolates," not "life was like a box of chocolates," as the character actually says. This is often thought to be a case of the Mandela effect, a common and harmless phenomenon where people report having false memories of prior events, such as misremembering a quote or believing a certain actor or public figure is dead when they're actually alive, or vice versa. However, if this incident is an actual moment of SCP-5346 infection, then the victim is in for a far more unpleasant experience. They will first report an obsessive desire to re-watch the film, watching it again and again, and each time noticing more inconsistencies between the film's reality and their memories of watching it. This will initially just seem strange, but as the condition progresses, it will take a turn for the unsettling. They will feel as though the Gump character is a malevolent force who's somehow watching them through the screen, displaying his own independent intelligence and a strong desire to harm the viewer. If the Foundation hasn't intercepted the case at this stage, it will get even worse. The victim will begin to see an individual with a remarkable resemblance to Forrest Gump, stalking them in the real world, getting closer and more threatening by the day. The victim will eventually be found dead of extreme blunt force trauma to the cranium. How exactly they received this blunt force trauma is unknown. The Foundation's discovery of this particular anomalous phenomenon began with a small thread of posts on the infamous Parawatch forums, a website dedicated to conspiracy theorists and paranormal enthusiasts of all stripes. The Foundation keeps a close eye on the Parawatch forums, as a number of anomalous cases have first been discovered through whisperings on its most strange and clandestine boards. The first post, from a user called Rage the Comic, real name Jackson Collins, detailed a peculiar experience. While quarantined in his home due to the 2020 viral pandemic, Jackson decided to re-watch Forrest Gump as a nostalgic favorite. That's when he noticed the cursed line discrepancy and decided to ask if others had the same sense of strangeness and confusion upon rewatching the film as an adult. The post quickly attracted the attention of some of the site's other users with mixed sympathy and derision. Jackson had clearly awoken something. Other forumites reported a similar sense of unease when revisiting the movie, sensing some kind of malice coming from the Forrest Gump character. But nobody was feeling this more than Jackson himself, the possible patient zero of the phenomenon. His severe paranoia increased, curdling into a dangerous obsession with the film, completely consistent with other people infected by the SCP-5346 phenomenon. This is the point where the Gump entity seemingly crossed the threshold, entering the physical world and stalking Jackson, appearing in his dreams and allegedly even staring through his windows, each time bearing a horrifying, satisfied grin. He continued posting about his journey on the forum as the SCP-5346 stalking situation escalated to a fever pitch. Jackson wouldn't actually make any further posts on the Parawatch forum after that. He seemed, for all intents and purposes, to have fallen off the map. Foundation agents who had been closely monitoring the situation decided to investigate, and when they were eventually able to find Jackson's home, they discovered that he had been dead for weeks. The cause of death was the same blunt force trauma to the cranium of all the other victims of SCP-5346. When the agents confiscated Jackson's phone, they also found a message in his drafts that he had clearly intended to post to the Parawatch forums before he had been killed. It read, "I'm not crazy. I know I'm not. This thing is definitely onto me. I'm currently hiding in a closet, forcing myself not to burst into tears. I hear it walking around my hallways. It lingers, constantly surrounding me at all times. This thing is not Gump. Hell, it's not even human. It's hungry. Whether it be for revenge or blood, I'm not exactly sure, but that doesn't matter now. I've called the police. But they won't be here in time to save me. Nor would they believe me if I told them about the monster that was hunting me down. I want to scream so badly.
I'm too terrified to throw away my life that quickly. Please, do not fall down the rabbit hole. Save yourself, or it'll come for you too. Rage the Comic, signing out. Those same agents also found a note in Jackson's home, handwritten, that said, "Mama always said to stand up to snitches." SCP-5346 is currently classified as uncontained because the sheer rarity of instances have made attempts to capture any kind of physical entity relating to 5346 a waste of Foundation resources. Instead, containment efforts on this anomaly are focused on finding and suppressing posts like the ones shown in this video, and getting to any affected individuals before SCP-5346 can cause them physical harm. To do your part in helping the Foundation contain SCP-5346, exercise caution when obsessing over nostalgic films, because like a certain container full of confectionaries, you never know what you're going to get. The lights go out on Maple Street as a young woman takes stock of her marriage and the man she once thought she knew. She sits at the kitchen counter, absently stirring a cup of tea that went cold hours ago, but she just can't bring herself to stand and heat it back up. She glances at the baby monitor sitting next to her, grabs it, and holds it to her ear. Steady, peaceful breathing. The baby is fine. No one needs a thing from her right now. She stares at the seat across from her, where her husband sits every morning, sharing coffee and breakfast before they start the day. She glances at the clock. 8 p.m. He'll be home soon. She'll have to face him, have to find a way to look him in the eye, force a smile. Pretend she doesn't know that he's getting home 2 hours late, from who knows where. The thought turns her stomach. It wasn't always like this. Their marriage wasn't always a tense charade, their home a haunted house. He was sweet that first year. He'd buy her flowers and take her out to dinner. He'd kiss her in the morning before they'd even brush their teeth. He wouldn't come home smelling like his secretary's perfume. But ever since the baby, something's been different. The light behind his eyes has gone dim. He won't help with late-night feedings, won't change diapers. Most of the time, he acts as if the baby doesn't exist. His own son. He just comes home, stares vacantly at the TV, and expects her to handle everything without so much as a single complaint. She hasn't slept in weeks. She hasn't been down to her art studio in the basement in months. Then, a sound shakes her from her thoughts. She hears the unmistakable rumble of a car pulling into the driveway, and fixes a stiff smile on her face. Maybe she'll leave him. Maybe tonight she'll work up the courage to say those words that will change everything. I want a divorce. The baby barely has a father now. What difference would it really make? The woman's husband stumbles through the door, lipstick on his collar and the smell of whiskey on his breath. He greets her with a kiss on the cheek, more out of obligation than anything else, and grabs himself a can of soda from the fridge. She offers him some stew from the stovetop. He brushes her off, saying, I already ate. She doesn't bother asking when or how, when he supposedly came straight home from work. There's no point. She knows he'll only lie. Do you want to say goodnight to the baby? She asks. It's a test, as she watches his face for any flicker of fatherly affection. Isn't it asleep by now? It. He calls their son, it. He's sleeping, but you could still go up and see him, if you're quiet. I had a long day. I'm tired. I'll see you in the morning. She can't help herself. Him. What was that? Him. He's not a thing. He's our child. He sets the can on the coffee table with a heavy clatter. Do you have to nitpick every word that comes out of my mouth? She deflates at the outburst. No. He sighs, shaking his head. Don't look at me like that. I can't stand when you stare at me like that. She averts her eyes, looking down. Fine. I'll go up and check on him. You enjoy your relaxation time. That's it. Tonight is the night. She's going to pack a bag tonight. She'll leave and start a new life, just her and her son. He won't even miss them when they're gone. It'll be better for everyone this way. She'll just go upstairs, check the baby, wait for him to fall asleep. Then she'll just cut and run. It's not like he deserves a proper goodbye from her. She can go away, go to her sister's place. As she fantasizes about leaving him, spending peaceful days in a little country house with her son and maybe a dog, she finds that the baby has spit up all over his pajamas. She scoops him up into her arms to make sure everything is okay otherwise, and he's fine, just a mess. As she holds him, he stirs awake and begins to cry. Oh, sweetheart, I'll need to change you and give you a bath. Shh, it's okay, you're all right. What's wrong? Her husband's voice comes from the doorway, startling her. It doesn't concern you. She can't help herself. Her resentment creeps into her voice.
He just needs a bath. What, you think I can't bathe my own son? He scoffs. That's it? Well, you haven't done it yet, so. When she turns to look at her husband, there are tears in his eyes. I'll do it now. Something in his voice is so sincere, she falters in her determination for a moment. Maybe he'll really try. Maybe things will go back to how they used to be. And she really, really needs a rest. So she hands the baby over to him and sits down in the soft chair in the corner of the nursery. Before too long, the exhaustion overcomes her and she nods off. In her sleep, she can't see her husband leaving the bathroom to go downstairs and catch the last 20 minutes of the Dodgers game, leaving the baby alone in the tub. When she stirs awake, the crib is still empty. She can hear the water running, and she knows. She just knows what has happened. What she let happen. No, what he did. A glance into the bathroom confirms her suspicions, and with a primal scream of pain, rage, and heartbreak, she tears down the stairs to confront the murderer himself. She finds him asleep on the couch and takes a moment to catch her breath, to wipe the tears from her eyes. Did he do it by accident or on purpose, to punish her, to free himself from their marriage once and for all, to break her heart beyond repair? It doesn't matter in the end. What's done is done, whether he meant it or not. But what can she do? What could ever make this right? She wants to scream, to set the house on fire, to tear him to shreds. Then she spots it. The baseball bat leaned against the wall by the door in case of an intruder. She picks it up, feeling the weight of the wood in her hands, the heft of it. Swung hard enough, with real intent behind it, it could really do some damage. Slowly, thoughtfully, she walks back toward the couch, raises the bat, and swings. It only takes one good hit to get the job done, but she swings the bat a few more times anyway, as something inside of her bends and breaks. Until the tears stop falling, until her vision comes back, and everything stops looking like a wash of red. He doesn't even scream, never wakes from his stupor to see the look on his wife's face when she gets her revenge. He's just gone. She wipes the red from her eyes and lets the bloodied bat drop to the floor. She started the day as a wife, as a mother, but now she's ending it as a killer. He deserved it, she tells herself. He took her baby from her, so she got him back. But why doesn't she feel any relief? Why does she still feel the gnawing grief in the pit of her stomach, feel the darkness clawing at her heart? First things first, she needs to get him out of the living room, out of sight of prying eyes and nosy neighbors. She could try to bury him, but where? The yard isn't exactly private, and she's not sure how much she could even dig up before sunrise. No, that won't do. Then the idea hits her, and she grabs him by the arms and begins dragging the lifeless body of the man she once loved toward the basement stairs. He's heavy, much heavier than she expected, but she supposed they called it dead weight for a reason. She grunts and struggles as she drags him down the stairs, wincing as his head bumps against the steps, before reminding herself he's not using it anymore. She surprises herself with a laugh, a dry sound echoing in the empty basement. She drags him past the last chair, and he lands on the floor with a thud in the room that she converted into her home art studio when they first bought the house, back when things were still good. Her eyes dart about the room, the half-finished paintings, the wood carvings she abandoned when she got pregnant, the paints and long dried-out lumps of clay, the potter's wheel in the corner. Her eyes settle on a metal frame, large and twisted into a vaguely human shape. She had crafted it years ago, intending to cover it with concrete and paint it, but never got around to it. No, she had been forced to put it away. Her husband hadn't liked it, had thought it was creepy and odd, and didn't want her working with such heavy materials. Just another thing he took from her, another dream he destroyed. It's just about his size, now that she takes a look at it with him lying limply on the ground so close by. With a little bit of muscle, some determination, he would fit right inside. And there are the tubs of cement, still sealed tight and ready to mix, just as she left them. She could shove him into the frame, paint him with layer on layer of cement, and it would be like he had disappeared in the night. A fitting coffin for the man, she thought. The perfect place to hide him, too. No one would ever know. No bones to dig up in the garden out back, no smell of rot seeping out from beneath the floorboard. She smiled to herself, just a little bit. In death, her husband would help her finish her greatest work. She didn't consider herself a wife or a mother, not anymore, but she was still an artist. and he would be her art. As she mixes the cement, she hums a little song to herself, beginning to feel something like peace. Everything is ruined, her life as she knew it completely turned upside down, but she is here in the art studio, creating again. Not a waste of time now, is it? She remarks to her husband's body. He doesn't answer. Typical. Why get an art degree, you said? Well, it prepared me for this, didn't it? Wonder what I'll do with you when you're done. Maybe I'll keep you down here. That seems like a waste. Maybe I'll get you displayed in a gallery. Let people buy tickets to take a look at you. You'll be my masterpiece. You'd hate that, wouldn't you? Me thriving, creating, all without you there to make snide comments and treat me like dirt. As she waits for the concrete to become usable, she turns her attention back to the metal frame. Time to put her ex-husband in his place. She lifts him and begins to wedge his body into the metal structure. He's heavy, getting heavier all the time, and left a trail of blood behind on the floor that she would have to clean up and bleach later. But after several sweaty minutes, he is in place. He looks correct to her, sitting there in the frame, ready to become something new, something different, something better than he ever was in life. The concrete is ready, and she begins to smooth it over the body and metal frame, flesh and blood, and sweat and grit, layer upon layer upon layer. Mix, smooth, wait, mix, smooth, wait. All the while she talks to him, weeps bitter tears into the concrete. At one point, she pricks her finger, her blood dripping into the mixture and becoming part of the sculpture. For days she carries on this way, not breaking to eat, bathe, or sleep. After 3 days pass, she runs out of concrete, but the sculpture is not finished. She'll need to go out and get more. She takes a shower, washing away the dust, the blood, and the guilt, changes into fresh, clean clothes, and takes a drive into town. She picks up more concrete first, telling the clerk some story about home improvements she's working on. He asks if she's married, if her husband will be helping with the work. I'm recently separated, she replies. On the way home, a small store catches her eye. It's a place she's driven by plenty of times, a little occult shop filled with herbs and tapered candles and strange leather-bound books. She isn't sure if she believes in this sort of thing, not really, but something makes her park and walk inside anyway. A gnarled old woman behind the counter spots her, and without speaking, points her toward a room in the back. It's different there, darker, filled with vials of thick, dark liquid, shelves full of skulls that might be human, though she isn't sure. In the back of the room, there is a bottle of paint, deep red and vibrant. What it's doing here, she couldn't be certain. But as soon as she sets eyes on it, she knows she needs to have it, needs to add it to her sculpture to make it truly complete. She brings it to the woman at the counter, but she just says, "Take it, no charge. I can tell you really need it. Just be careful what you use it for. It's powerful stuff." She wants to ask what that means, what's so powerful about this little bottle of strange red paint, but she doesn't. She's much too exhausted and much too determined to get back home and put the finishing touches on her masterpiece. She drives straight home and hauls the concrete and paint inside, carrying it down into the basement. She's dizzy from hunger and lack of sleep, but she doesn't care. She has one singular vision right now, and she must see it carried out. She mixes more concrete and slathers the whole shape again, sculpting out the round, bulbous head, the arms at its sides, the legs and feet, the curve of the whole figure covered in thick gray sludge. In potential, a blank canvas. Before it dries, she opens the paint. It smells musty, rich, and somehow ancient. It clings to the bristles of her brush like a living thing and takes to the surface of the sculpture eagerly, spreading out as if of its own volition as she brushes it on evenly. She paints the whole thing, every inch of it. At first, it doesn't seem as if there will be enough paint to finish the job, but somehow that little bottle coats the whole figure in deep, dark red. She looks down at her hands, stained just as brightly as they were when she swung that baseball bat. She looks back up at her creation, the amalgamation of the fear, the pain, the heartbreak, the pure, primal rage, and begins to cry. The tears fall freely into her palms, and, without thinking, she smears them into the concrete and paint until they disappear into the art. Then she takes a step back, watching it all dry. All of that work, all of that time, that great yawning chasm of loss, and this is what she has made of it. She loves it, and she hates it all at once, and she can't stop staring at the place where its eyes would be if it had them. She half expects to see something looking back. She shakes her head, looking down at the floor for a moment, Then she hears the sound of stone and metal grinding together. Her gaze snaps back up, and she sees that the sculpture has moved, just a little, its head turned in her direction. In an instant, her husband's words come back to her.
Don't look at me like that. I can't stand when you stare at me like that. It couldn't be.
She stares at it for a long time, her eyes watering from the effort. She blinks. Her eyes open, and the sculpture is gone. There it is again, the grind of metal and stone against each other. Then, with the sound of bones snapping, everything went dark. Her hate, her vengeance, her desperate act of violence and creation, with a splash of the most unusual paint, led to the creation of a deadly masterpiece that would one day be known as SCP-173.
He's never believed all the superstitious stories about the place, no matter how creepy and empty it might have been. A building is still just a building, isn't it? But now, watching in abject horror as the foggy split jaw of the specter cackled maniacally, seeing it floating closer, the investigator starts to reconsider his belief. Maybe there is such a thing as ghosts. It all starts the way most cases do, with a client and a sad story. By now, the investigator has long since become accustomed to how things play out. Someone whose case has been thrown out by the cops, left unsolved and without a resolution, they find themselves turning to him, and his most recent client is much the same. It's a missing persons case. The police have already given up the search for the client's son and a close friend, who have both vanished under mysterious circumstances. With the client in tears, saying she just wants to know if her son is alive or not, the investigator agrees to take on the case. He tells her he'll do what he can, even if the answer he winds up uncovering isn't the one that brings happiness. It could at least provide some closure. The client hands over her son's computer, and it doesn't take long for the investigator to happen across his first lead. As it turns out, the son runs a channel right here on YouTube. The investigator takes a closer look. It seems to be dedicated to discussing and uncovering the existence of the paranormal. Spirits, seances, Sasquatches, trying to decipher how much of it is real and what are just flat-out stories. The investigator shakes his head and sighs. He's never been the superstitious type. Ghosts and gremlins were usually just myths that distract from the very real wrongdoings in the world. But then he notices something, a recurring series of videos on the YouTuber's channel. Each video has a similar format. He and a cameraman venture to a rundown building that is allegedly haunted and then proceed to stay the night there or try to commune with spirits. While the jury was still out on a ghostly abduction, the investigator feels certain that the YouTuber must have been out filming another of these paranormal explorations on the night he and his cameraman went missing. And sure enough, the investigator doesn't have to look far to be proven right. There's a log of direct messages between the YouTuber and the cameraman discussing ideas for videos that might potentially boost their views and engagement. The YouTuber points out that videos about haunted prisons tend to bring in an interested audience, and the cameraman discovers the location of an abandoned federal penitentiary after some research. They both agree to head there and plan to film a new video when they do. There's even an address in their chat log, and they even arrange to meet on the same night their disappearance would take place. So the investigator gets in his car and makes the drive towards the location. By the time he arrives, it's already dark out. Haunted or not, the sight of the desolate prison complex at night even gives the investigator the creeps. He ventures inside, the echo of his boots on the ground cutting through the eerie silence. Each step is slow and carefully placed to avoid stepping or tripping over any hazards that might be strewn about on the ground, but also so the investigator can cover every corner of the abandoned federal penitentiary. After all, anywhere around could be clues to the mysterious disappearances. He knows he probably won't get lucky and stumble upon both the YouTuber and the cameraman, alive but just trapped somewhere in the empty prison. But then, he hears a sudden sound. It almost sounds like a voice, a person screaming. The investigator looks around, stopping and waiting to see if he hears it again. A few moments pass, and nothing but the silence of the old prison, with the occasional breeze from outside its old walls. Might have just been the wind playing tricks on him, the investigator rationalizes to himself, before noticing that the hairs on his neck are all standing to attention. He quietly scolds himself for getting spooked at nothing. He'd be getting scared of his own shadow next. He ventures further into the abandoned penitentiary, passing vacant cells that once would have housed thieves and murderers. It makes the investigator wonder as he quietly walks on,
if anyone he ever got arrested made it to this prison. He's not broken many cases that involve violent crimes, but a very select few from his career spring to mind. Not every case he looks into has a simple, straightforward answer, and sometimes a missing person isn't just someone that skipped town or come out to a creepy old prison to film a YouTube video. As the investigator walks carefully into a cell block in the deepest part of the prison, he almost trips. Something is at his feet, its weight shifting as his boot knocks against it. Taking a closer look, the investigator reaches towards the ground to retrieve the object. His fingertips brush up against it, and he picks it up. It's a camera, and not a cheap camcorder either, a far more impressive piece of equipment than an average person would own, and certainly one too expensive for its owner to just leave it lying around. It looks like a miniaturized television studio camera, complete with a microphone and a small LCD screen that flips out of its side. Fairly confident that this belonged to the missing cameraman, the investigator turns the device on, not realizing how grave of a mistake he's just made. The camera's screen blinks to life, with an icon in the corner displaying how much charge the battery has left. Only a quarter. The investigator realizes he needs to get as many answers as he can from this thing, and fast. He hits play on one of the most recently recorded clips, and the display presents him with footage of the YouTuber. The video's timestamp confirms it's from the fateful night of the untimely disappearance, and in it, the YouTuber is excitedly welcoming his audience to the abandoned federal penitentiary. He explains that the prison has long been rumored to be haunted, and that he and the cameraman are going to determine if the rumors of ghosts in the cells are true. The clip cuts, and the next starts playing automatically. Most of them are brief B-roll shots taken by the cameraman, showing the creepy, unsettling atmosphere of the vacant prison. Bars without anyone behind them, the moon visible through the decaying ceiling, and other clips intended to be edited into a longer video. There are takes of the YouTuber as he tries to explain the history of the haunted prison, only to trip up his words, being forced to start again. It's all rough, imperfect, and evidently left unfinished. Not much of note takes place, until the YouTuber and his cameraman reach the spot where the investigator would inevitably find the discarded video camera. On screen, the YouTuber explains that they're standing in the death row block, the place where convicts were sent while awaiting their executions. As he's recounting exactly how many met their deaths, calling this particular block the most haunted in the whole prison, a sudden noise distracts the YouTuber and the cameraman filming. They wander deeper into the cell block until they come across a foreboding room with faded lettering over the doorway. The camera's microphone picks up the buzzing of electricity coming from the other side, and the pair venture through to a grim sight awaiting them on the other side. The YouTuber is in awe, perhaps thinking of all the views it will garner from his morbidly fixated subscribers. The cameraman doesn't appear on screen, but his reaction is easy to gauge from what he says as they step into the room. He's horrified. The gravity of what the place is and what it was built and used for hitting him at once, and it isn't hard to see why. The pair are standing in the execution chamber. In the middle of the room is an old chair with worn leather straps on the armrests and the front two legs. A rusted metal apparatus is affixed to the top and back of it too, giving a clear indication that this isn't exactly a comfy recliner. It's an electric chair. Of course, this doesn't stop the YouTuber from excitedly sitting in it, slipping his hands through the straps, and then shaking erratically. He's pretending to be electrocuted. The cameraman urges him to stop, making it known how distasteful he finds the mocking action. But moments later, both of their attention is suddenly drawn to the back wall of the chamber. Something is dripping on the wall. Catching the low light from the video camera and the flashlight on the YouTuber's cell phone, the camera pans closer, only for the cameraman holding it to recoil in shock as he sees what's on the wall. It's blood. Fresh blood. Still wet. He panics and starts accusing the YouTuber of arriving early to smear fake blood on the wall as some kind of prank, all to add to the horror factor of the video by making the cameraman believe it to be real. But the YouTuber insists he'd done nothing of the sort. They take another look at the bloody mess on the wall. It looks like a diagram of some kind that someone has put great effort into painting on the back wall of the execution chamber. Immediately next comes a flood of frightened questions from the cameraman. If it's real, then whose blood is it? Why would someone do something like this? And were they even safe anymore? The YouTuber doesn't answer. The color has drained from his face as he stares up at where the ceiling meets the top of the wall. He's frozen to the spot. All of his bravado and exaggerated, ostentatious presenter persona has fallen away, leaving only one real thing: fear.
The cameraman whips the video camera's lens to the spot where the YouTuber is looking, then he sees it for himself. The seam, where the highest point of the wall connects to the ceiling, is bleeding. Long crimson drops start to rapidly spill from the wall and cause the pair to turn heel and run out of the execution chamber. Back out in the death row block of the abandoned federal penitentiary, the YouTuber and the cameraman go into a full-blown panic. Neither one of them can believe what they've seen. The idea that someone else was pranking them is quickly thrown out. Nobody else knows they were coming here, and the blood seems too authentic. The YouTuber is familiar with using fake blood for cheap scares and videos. It's hard to fake the metallic smell of the real thing. Suddenly, a loud cacophony erupts from nearby. It's deafening, the clanging of metal on metal. The cameraman whips the lens over to the cells. Despite being abandoned, Death Row worryingly seems more alive than ever. The rusted doors to the cells are swinging open and shut rapidly, crashing as they slam completely of their own accord. The pair begin to run back the way they came, towards the entrance of the cell block. The YouTuber trips, but as the cameraman turns back to look at him, something inexplicable is happening. He's being dragged back across the floor, like someone is pulling him by the ankle, his hands desperately clawing for something to grip onto in order to save himself. In a second, the YouTuber is gone, dragged screaming into the shadows. The cameraman turns to run again, when something causes the camera to tumble to the ground. Through the tiny screen, the investigator hears the dying screams of the cameraman, while only his shoes are in frame. He hits pause on the footage and notices the timestamp, just over 20 minutes. Combined with the duration of the previous clips, he deduces that the pair were only inside the prison for around half an hour. As to what happened to them, that question still perplexes him. A wild animal attack seems possible, but that doesn't explain the bizarre bleeding walls in the execution chamber. A troubled thought suddenly causes the investigator to check his watch. He's been there for just over 25 minutes himself. A figure has appeared in front of him while he's been distracted. The investigator thinks it's a trick of the light, until he sees, or rather, doesn't see, the legs. The figure is hovering off the ground, missing their legs. Can't be. Surely it couldn't be an actual... It floats closer, and that's when he sees the same grotesque face he's seen before. He still remembers the day they caught the killer. His mugshot was printed in every newspaper. His scarred, twisted jaw reminds the world of his crimes, and now, so does his ghost. There's something sharp and pointed in its hand as it gets closer, a rudimentary blade, and it's the only thing the investigator sees as the killer claims yet another victim. Exploring any abandoned building in the pursuit of internet virality is usually not an advisable course of action. Even less so when that building happens to be SCP-450, the abandoned federal penitentiary. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that there's nothing inherently dangerous about a building. Naturally, after so many years of neglect, it has seen better days. Much of the now empty prison is in a pretty dire state of disrepair, and collapsing masonry to the head can prove to be fatal if you're standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, we all know it wasn't designed to fall into such disuse. Things often decay with time, left to rot like a prisoner in a cell. Structural hazards aside, it might seem on the surface like there's nothing unusual about the penitentiary itself. Naturally, any empty building becomes a little creepy when it's been abandoned for so long, particularly after dark, and especially in a place that was once designed to be filled with inmates and guards. And while it might be true that the empty building itself doesn't pose much of a threat, nobody said SCP-450 was empty. Some of the prisoners that were remanded there during its heyday were no doubt made to serve life sentences for heinous crimes, and some of them are still serving their sentences from beyond the grave. The SCP Foundation's extensive exploration into the abandoned federal penitentiary has determined a number of factors relating to its anomalous properties. For one, the encounters with supernatural phenomena are confined to only one particular cell block of the entire prison. Sounds at least a little bit more manageable, doesn't it? After all, at least if you were able to venture around other parts of the prison, then the only creepy part would be how run down and vacant the place is. But over on Death Row, things are far, far creepier. It seems only fitting that the most haunted area of SCP-450 is the portion of the prison where inmates were held before execution. These cells are those that were once reserved for the most diabolical criminals, who were deemed so dangerous and guilty of such horrific crimes that they were sentenced to death. And it seems that for some of them, this solution wasn't as permanent as you might think. Traversing from the entrance of SCP-450 into the cell block, one will reach the execution chamber just over 160 meters away. Much like the rest of the place, this too hasn't seen much use in a long time, although the sounds you might hear inside might fool you into thinking otherwise. Occasionally, the sounds of crackling sparks, deadly voltages of electricity will ring out, along with the long-forgotten screams of those condemned to death by the electric chair. Upon closer inspection, those brave or foolish enough to venture into the abandoned federal penitentiary will notice a pattern on the wall directly behind the old electric chair. What might look like just a complex inscription is, in actuality, a map of the entire prison, and it's drawn in blood. SCP Foundation researchers have discovered that this map has a tendency to degrade over time, thanks to the amount of natural wear and tear SCP-450 has undergone. For that reason, and perhaps so the inmates can find their way around, the bloody diagram is regularly maintained and repainted when needed. Speaking of the inmates, you can surely imagine what they must have been like while they were still alive in order to be held on death row. Now try to picture how much worse they are after having been executed. Descriptions of the numerous entities inhabiting SCP-450 are scarce, and perhaps that's for the better if you happen to be faint of heart. However, one thing the Foundation knows for sure is that they are all hostile. An encounter with any one of the spectral prisoners is inevitably fatal. The Foundation is able to determine a few specific criteria that will cause one of the ghostly convicts to appear. If one or more of these is not followed, then it will lead to a much quicker death sentence than those once served at SCP-450. First, using any other entrance to gain access to the haunted cell block other than the main door. That means no trying to get there by doubling back through empty corridors and taking shortcuts up stairwells. And while you're at it, it's best to keep your movements slow and steady. Traveling through SCP-450 at a speed faster than 0.25 meters per second will attract some unwanted and undead attention. Any personnel the Foundation tasks with performing maintenance within the abandoned federal penitentiary need to follow specific instructions in order to make it in and out in one piece. By walking silently at a reduced pace, it takes them approximately 11 minutes to make it from the main entrance of Death Row to the execution chamber. But they will need to account for the journey back, too. Anyone present inside the cell block for longer than 25 minutes at a time will invariably attract the presence of the prisoners. With the journey taking 11 minutes both ways, that leaves personnel with only 3 minutes to repaint the blood-soaked map and make it back out to safety in enough time, and trying to rush back is hardly advisable. The faster you move, the louder your footsteps are likely to be, and sound seems to be yet another thing the infernal inmates are drawn to. Noises louder than 25 decibels are known to attract them, as is operating any electronic devices and returning to SCP-450 more than once every 24 hours. Of course, it's hardly smooth sailing for those that the Foundation does send into the abandoned federal penitentiary. Personnel will often report similar experiences being inside the haunted cell block. They will frequently experience hallucinations of spectral, translucent figures. Often, some of these poltergeist prisoners will appear clearer than others, and some still look more human than others too. Auditory hallucinations are also recurringly experienced by those who visit SCP-450, many being a cacophony of imprisoned screams, the desperate cries of those who are still trapped in the prison, now with no guards around ordering them to keep quiet after lights out. But the Foundation likes to assure its staff that anything they experience within SCP-450 is perfectly normal. There's no cause for concern, no matter how many spectral voices one might hear. If the walls start to bleed, don't worry about it. And if personnel encounter any dead, rotting remains, they are advised not to investigate for their own safety. It certainly seems that while SCP-450 no longer houses any living convicts, the abandoned federal penitentiary is still very much in active use when it comes to keeping its poltergeist population imprisoned. Then again, the Foundation can only really keep the doors locked and occasionally head into SCP-450 for maintenance. Anyone who accidentally enters the building, be they civilians or personnel, are to be considered lost, and no attempts at rescue are to be made under any circumstances. It seems that these days the inmates are running the penitentiary.
You've seen his face before, probably during a particularly distressing bout of sleep paralysis. His appearance can vary a bit from manifestation to manifestation, but a few traits are always present. He resembles an elderly man. His touch corrodes everything in his path. His presence creates a disgusting, black, mucus-like substance thought to be a method of predigestion of his prey. And he is rotting. No matter his appearance, he is always in some stage of decomposition. Gray skin sloughing away from yellowed bone, eyes milky and flat, but brimming with malice, wide, toothless mouth stretched into a wicked grin. The entity is incredibly difficult to contain. Its corrosive properties and ability to vanish into solid matter and disappear into its pocket dimension layer make it a threat as unpredictable as it is dangerous. The smell of decay and the presence of visible corrosion on any surfaces nearby may be the only warning a person gets before the old man grabs them in his decomposing arms, dragging them off to a painful, terrifying demise. We know where the being disappears to, and have learned a great deal about how he operates. But where did he come from? It is the year 2000. Dr. Robert Scranton and his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, are the head researchers at SCP Foundation Site 120. Over the course of their happy relationship, the two have been working on an experimental research project, an early prototype reality anchor device called the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer. After a lot of late nights at the office, working and reworking the theory, it is, at long last, ready for testing. Dr. Scranton is standing in Reality Lab A as Dr. Lang observes from a nearby room. He follows the same routine he has followed each time they tested the LSS, walking down a line of buttons and levers, pressing and flipping each into place. The little red blinking light signifies that the microphone is recording his every comment and observation. Suddenly, the routine is broken by a low rumbling sound from deep, deep within the earth. The ground beneath him begins to shake, and Dr. Scranton stumbles, losing his balance as the once solid floor begins to roil and quake as the seismic shift rolls through the site. He hears the unmistakable grind and splintering of metal and plastic as the LSS-2 begins to shake, components sliding out of place and breaking off. Nearby, Dr. Lang's monitor goes dark as the security feed is cut short by the earthquake's damage. "Robert!" she screams, making a break for the door and rushing to Reality Lab A, terrified that she will find her husband's body lying on the floor. When she and the guards reach the room, however, they find nothing. Well, not nothing entirely. The room is a wreck, bits of machinery strewn across the floor, the smell of burning plastic in the air. But the Lang-Scranton Scrambler's control panel and Dr. Robert Scranton are nowhere to be found. Dr. Lang falls to her knees in the suddenly empty room, pounding at the floor in despair. "Where did he go?" she demands, but of course, no one knows the answer. No one wants to say what they're thinking. Wherever he is, Dr. Scranton is probably dead. Probably long, long gone, and he is never coming back. But no one says it, not out loud. They just think it, and keep thinking it, for the next 5 years, 11 months, and 21 days. The time passes, and most everyone forgets about Dr. Robert Scranton. Everyone except for Dr. Anna Lang. She never gives up hope, never lets go of the possibility that somewhere, in another world, another time, on another planet, her love is still alive. One day she wakes up, and it's December 23rd, 2005. A day like any other, save for its uncomfortable proximity to the holidays she struggles to celebrate nowadays. But then, in the middle of the day, something impossible happens. The LSS control panel reappears in Reality Lab A. It isn't how anyone last saw it, though. It's coated in some sort of unidentified organic matter, and it reeks of blood, vomit, and decay. As her colleagues try to shield her from the sight, try to warn her away, Dr. Anna Lang wades into the area, desperate for a glimpse at any sign of her husband's fate. As she makes her way into the containment field, she is unable to contain her horror. "Oh God, what the hell? What is all this? This is the... Oh God, Robert? Is this you? Oh God, please, no, don't let it be you, Robert, I thought, how can this thing be?" Her colleagues try to stop her, but she touches the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer interface, and it fires to life. It still works. Somehow it still works. She racks her brain for what to do next, before saying, "Access audio log. Playback starting from January 2nd, 2000. The machine prompts her to verbally state her password, and her voice shakes as she replies, "Password is Anna Bobana." "Request acknowledged. Processing," the machine replies. "I'm sorry. There are no audio logs for January 2nd, 2000. Dr. Scranton accessed log on January 13th, 2000, via voice recognition at time. Anna slams her hands down on the machine with a cry. Play back now! Damn it, play it back! Her researcher warns her not to touch any of the material with her bare hands, but she doesn't hear him. She is too busy, calling out to Robert, hoping that somehow, somewhere, he can hear her. There's so much blood here, there's so much... Honey, are you okay? Where did you go? Oh God, oh God, oh God. Something small and metallic clatters to the floor, lost in the sludge. She retrieves it, wipes it off on her lab coat, and holds it to the light. She would recognize it anywhere. She slipped it onto her true love's finger on the happiest day of her life. It's Robert's wedding ring. Her knees buckle at the realization. She collapses to the ground, and her head cracks against the floor. One of her colleagues snaps into action. Report, this is Dr. Matthew Skinner reporting from Site 120, Reality Lab A. I need medical attention here immediately. Once Dr. Lang recovers from her fall, she demands access to the rematerialized control panel. She's going to go through the audio logs one by one and find out exactly what happened to her husband, even if the truth is as ugly as she fears. The machine whirs to life, and her lost love's voice emanates from the speakers.
Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. She has green eyes.
I love her very much.
He repeated these simple truths to himself for days, before he even realized that the control panel was picking up his voice.
My name is Robert Scranton. Yeah, my name is Robert Scranton, former researcher at Foundation Site 120. It has been... I don't know, actually. I can't remember. I estimate it's been 10 days, but I can't... Oh, God. Can anyone hear me? I don't know what's happened. I don't know where I am, and please, is anyone there? Hello? Anyone? Anyone?
He began keeping track of how much time passed as best he could.
2 weeks, 3 days, 7 hours, and 58 minutes. Oh, Jesus.
Back at the Foundation, with at least a tenuous knowledge of where Dr. Scranton could be, personnel try their best to stage some kind of rescue effort. A mobile task force team is ordered to attempt to replicate the experiment with a hastily assembled Lang-Scranton stabilizer copy. The result is an explosion that kills 3 of them. Senior researchers also approach SCP-343, a powerful reality warper known to some as God, hoping to get some insight from him about where Dr. Scranton could be found. His response is,
"He's beyond any of us now. I'm truly, dreadfully sorry."
Anna starts having nightmares. She twists and turns in bed, haunted by visions of her beloved Robert consumed by darkness. A strange specter starts to appear in her dreams, a man with a horrible, rotted face. She turns to her bedside table in the night, numbers blurry on the screen of her alarm clock. The photograph of herself and Robert that she keeps there. Something is wrong with him, wrong with his face. Is it that same awful, rotted man? She screams and closes her eyes. When she opens them, the photo is normal again. She weeps into her pillow. It can't keep going on like this.
This place, it's some sort of reality gap, I think. If I don't concentrate on it, it's fine, but I feel this tingling all over my face. I'm not sure why.
2 months, 15 days, 4 hours.
Anna begins to accept the horrible truth. She may not see Robert ever again, and holding on to the foolish fantasy that she will is starting to kill her. She repeats it to herself like a mantra at work. Robert Scranton is dead. Robert Scranton is dead. Robert Scranton is dead. One day, a coworker notices her muttering and strikes up a conversation. It's been years since Robert disappeared. What's the harm in talking to someone again? She even finds herself smiling and laughing at his jokes, but when he asks if she'd like to go for coffee, she gets a flash of Robert screaming in the darkness, of that terrible, rotted face, grinning. She runs to the bathroom to throw up and weep.
The tingling in my face has worsened. I wish I could sleep here, but all this damn gunfire overhead, can't take it anymore. Can't take it.
Trench foot, shell shock,
Hell would be reprieve in a place like this. And all the men, all the poor souls who look up to me, call me Corporal. What a jerk. To think I have any more idea of what's going on here.
Anna can hear it in his voice. He's getting worn down. As Anna feels her emotions start to dull and fade, she begins accepting more dangerous assignments from her superiors, perhaps hoping just to feel something again. She works on the SCP-682 case, trying to devise more futile termination methods. She spends time with SCP-939, the abominations known as With Many Voices, until they start to imitate Robert's voice, and she knows that she can't do this anymore. She works with SCP-280, Eyes in the Dark, feeling no fear whatsoever as it floats towards her. The worst thing that could possibly happen to her has happened already. Now, she's just waiting, killing time. She has no idea of the further horrors to come.
Lately, I've been hearing whispers in the dark. I think the rats are talking to me. Oh, funny. My troops must think me mad. What does it matter? This is a mad place, a mad time. A mad man is perhaps best suited to a time like this.
So many went over the top yesterday, only to be cut down by machine gun fire. Isn't it odd that I laughed? It was so funny.
I think perhaps this mental malady is connected to a physical one. Nosebleeds and vomiting spells. A strange, black liquid. Faintly acidic to the touch. But so delicious. So fun. My troops tell me I look unwell. Like anything about this is well. Maybe I'll sneak into one of their bedsits tonight and teach them to lighten up a bit. None of them smile anymore. Me, I'm always smiling. I'll teach those little cowards to smile too.
But as she listens to more of the logs, she's forced to reckon with the fact it really isn't him anymore. Not as she'd ever known him. He'd become something else.
All the others are dead. All my good, hard work, making them dead. I followed them down the length of the trench. Their silly little bullets didn't hurt me. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. The look on their faces. All the screaming as they saw me. How thrilling to savor their fear as I approached. All those screams. What are you, you horrible old man? I showed them what I am. I can walk through walls now, you know. Have all the fun I want. Yes, yes, yes. Nothing can hurt me anymore. And I can hurt everyone. And when the war is over, I'll go home. Go home to my sweetheart. I know she's waiting for me. I can't wait to see her, to touch her beautiful face. My lovely
Anna.
Hearing him like this, so broken, so utterly transformed, it's too much for her to bear. But the work always needs her, and she returns to it day after day. One night, she sits up late, making her way through a stack of paperwork, when she hears it. A curious sound. Drip, drip, drip. Something thick dripping steadily onto the floor behind her. The smell of rot fills her nostrils, making her gag. She turns and comes face to face with SCP-106, dripping its slimy black mucus onto the floor, bringing decay to everything it touches. It reaches out toward her, grasping at her arm. She breaks free, but not before its touch melts away the fibers of her lab coat, threatening to seep through the fabric to her skin. All the while, it's staring straight at her, like it knows her. Anna runs out of the lab as fast as she can, shouting for help. A guard tries to come to her assistance, firing his weapon at the old man, but the bullets don't leave a dent, don't even slow him down. The old man grabs the weapon from the guard's hands, letting the metal rust, warp, and melt in his grasp. Then he turns his corrosive touch on the guard's face. Anna screams in horror at the sight, but she can do nothing to help him. All that she can do is keep running and hope that the monster doesn't catch her. She runs as fast as her legs can carry her, but she isn't as young as she once was, and years of sitting at a desk have made her muscles stiff and weak. Her foot hits the ground at just the wrong angle, and she stumbles, falling to the ground. She scrambles back to her feet, but when she looks up, something is horribly wrong. Her surroundings have changed. It looks like the Foundation site, but it's not quite the same. It's as if someone tried to recreate the facility from memory and couldn't retain all of the details. Then she hears it again. The drip, drip, drip. He's here. She spins around, and there it is. That awful face, so close to her own. She takes a trembling step back when suddenly, the monster speaks. It's him. She knows it, as surely as she knows that she is about to die. The monster that once was Robert Scranton reaches out and caresses Anna's cheek with his wrinkled hand. She screams as the skin begins to droop, and he seals her lips with a kiss that makes her insides drip like melting wax. The two become one once again. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-096, Sad Origin Story,